Good morning, all. There we are. Very good. Welcome all to the Regional Council meeting of Thursday, March 28th. I'd like to begin with the roll call. All members of council are present except Mayor Brown. Councillor Carlson is here now. Councillor DeMerla, who's away on a personal matter. Councillor Dillon. Councillor Groves, who is ill. Councillor Medeiros is not here. All other members are present. Declarations of any conflicts of interest. Seeing none. Approval of the minutes from February 28th. Someone would move them? Been moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Starr. All those in favor? That is carried. Approval of the agenda. It's been moved. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to add a discussion item on the future of the region of Peel and comments made in the media by members of this council.
Okay, Madam Clerk, would it be appropriate to bring that up under other business or a formal agenda item? What is your preference?
It would be under other business, but the discussion, because there was no prior notice, we'd have to report back to council. That could be a request. You could have some general discussion, but no decisions could be made.
Councillor Vicente, is that acceptable?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I will acknowledge you under other business. Are there any other items with regards to the approval of the agenda? I do have one. I need to add one more item, that the agenda for the March 28th Regional Council meeting include a communication from Blair Wolk, Vice President, Orlando Corporation, regarding the report titled The Changing Nature of Employment and Implications for Fiscal Health and Municipal Sustainability, to be dealt with under items in relation to enterprise programs and services, item 16.2, and further that the agenda for the March 28th, 2019 Regional Council meeting be approved as amended. That's been moved by Councillors Dasco and Councillor Downey. All those in favor? That is carried. Public announcements and pronouncements. Anyone? If not, I am going to take this up. Oh, sorry, Councillor Parrish.
I think we eliminated questions, but with the fire that occurred at the airport last week, I was wondering if we could get a report at some point on how our paramedics are dispensed over there, whether there's an added cost where the airport assists with that, and how many calls they get. Just a fulsome report on how the paramedics are dealt with the airport. Is that possible?
Yes, and I see Commissioner Polzinelli nodding, and she's got the clear direction on that, and that will come back.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Anyone else? If not, I would like to up-to-date council on a particular file. I want to give you a quick note with regards to the awareness campaign that we had on the development charges that was requested at our last meeting. At the direction of council, I wrote to Minister Clark to ask for assurances that the province was not going to be making changes that would impact the current DC regime. We were not able to connect prior to our established campaign launch date of March 15th, so staff at my request launched the PR campaign, going live with an informational webpage and a series of focused tweets on the issue. The message seemed very well received and resonated with residents, and we saw some very, very encouraging engagement. I'm pleased to report that I was afterwards able to discuss the issue directly with Minister Clark last week, and I am very optimistic based on the conversation that we had. I will not get into the details, but I will say that it was a very positive discussion, and based on the reassurances I received, I asked staff to pause the campaign at this time. Of course, we will continue to monitor the progress of the province's upcoming housing supply action plan and any proposed policy changes that will result once the plan is released, and we will be prepared to revisit our public awareness efforts if necessary, but at this time, I am comfortable with the standing down of the campaign. Are there any questions of members of council? If not, thank you. Okay, with that, I come to the consent agenda. Of course, we'll deal with the delegations and the staff presentations. I would go down to items 9.1 then, paramedic services, but that relates to Dr. Cheskus, so we'll be dealing with that. The communications 10.1. Do I have consent? Consent. Item 11.1 will also be dealt with ahead in the agenda under deputations. Item 11.2. Do I have consent? Consent. 11.3. Item 15.1. 15.2. 15.3. Question to be held, 15.3 then. Item 15.4, consent. Item 15.5. 15.6. Item 16, all on consent. Item 17.1. Oh, sorry, and the added letter as well that I just referred to in the additional agenda. Did anybody wish to speak to that, or do I have consent? That goes under consent as well. Item 17.1. 17.2. Question to be held, 17.2. 17.3. 17.4. 18.1. 18.2. We will deal with the notice of motion from Councillor Dasco. I will ask at this time, there's only one in-camera matter, but just in terms of managing our day, I think it's a rather straightforward matter, but would anybody want to go in camera for item 22.2? I'm just sorting out some expropriations on Mayfield that we've been dealing with. Seeing no need, then, did anybody, you had a question? If you had a question, I'm happy to go in camera.
It's not on this, actually. I wanted to go back to hold 17.3.
Okay, so I will deal with this now. So it seems we have consent on the in-camera as well. Last call, so we're good that we don't need to go in camera. Very good. And going back, I've asked to hold 17.3 as well. Madam Clerk?
18.2, the Great Lakes.
Oh, sorry, and 18.2, the Great Lakes.
Okay, there's a motion.
And there is a motion on that, so perhaps through the chair? There could be. I'll ask that that be held. Okay. I think that has it. All in favor of the consent agenda, and I'm going to need you to do that on a recorded vote and to push your buttons. And that carries. Thank you. With that, let's get right into it. Our first delegation, Dr. Sheldon Chexis, Medical Director, Sunnybrook Center for Pre-Hospital Medicine, following information on automated external defibrillator, drone delivery, and crowdsourcing. And I'll also bring forward report 9.1 at this time. Dr. Chexis, welcome. Good to see you as always.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much to Council for the privilege of being here.
Microphone.
There you go. Okay, there we go. Thank you so much. I figured I did this enough already. I know where the microphone was. It's interesting to look at council. Definitely a change in council in terms of a lot of new faces and a lot of faces that are very, very memorable. So hopefully for us today, we're going to give you some new innovation. This talk I'm going to give today on improving outcomes from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest, a community responder, an AED Drone Program, in my mind, in the 25 years I've been here, is probably the most innovative thing that we've come up with. And hopefully you'll find it very innovative as we describe what our research would look like. The following is my disclosure slide. And let's get right into it. I think by background, despite improvements in CPR quality, administration of drugs, using airways, cardiac arrest survival in most communities around the world really does remain abysmal. We've learned that there's no one special technique that actually is going to guarantee patient survival. But what we do know is that using bystander CPR and using an automatic external defibrillator has consistently been shown to improve outcomes. But do we have an effective strategy to, in fact, deploy AEDs currently? Our current strategy focuses on putting AEDs on walls where arrests are most likely to occur. We know that survival decreases 7 to 10% per minute of time, and the decrease in survival is really muted by getting bystander CPR. And bystander CPR in and of itself has been shown to double and at times triple cardiac arrest survival rates. The early use of an AED is even more dramatic and can improve survival to 60 to 70%. So clearly, AED deployment is critical. The challenges we have, though, is the vast majority of cardiac arrests happen in private homes, 85% of the time. So if you look at total number of cardiac arrests, only 2 or 3% of patients actually get an AED applied. When you look at public locations, 15 to 20% get an AED applied, but interestingly, that's despite the fact that there's another AED within 100 meters of the majority of these arrests. And the question is, how do you get more AEDs to the patient, given the fact that there's such close proximity to where the AEDs actually are? The approach we're proposing in our research is actually two-pronged to improve AED access in Peel Region. The focus of both approaches, though, is to get an AED to the patient as soon as possible and quicker than we can in our current system. We'd like to look at the concept of crowdsourcing via software known as FirstAED and have trained volunteers with AEDs dispatch as part of our EMS response. We'd also like to explore drone technology to improve the access to AEDs in rural communities as part of our strategy. In 2014, Council approved an enhanced CPR and AED program. To date, we have one of the largest AED databases in the world. We know where AEDs are, and we do something here that no one else actually in the world has done. Paul Snoblin, Katie Dainty, our qualitative researchers, 250 lay responders have been helped after they provided CPR in a case of cardiac arrest. No one in the world has done that research and helped people who have actually participated in cardiac arrest. So look at this. 600 cardiac arrests occurred within 250 meters of a fixed AED unit between 2015 and 2017. Yet only 10% of the time was an AED actually used by a bystander. But when it was used, half of the people survive. So clearly a benefit to survival, but why aren't they being used, and what are the challenges that we have? To do it, you have to leave someone to get the AED. You're not really able to locate the AED readily. Some people are just not confident to use an AED, and the perception that you need to be trained to AED is a fallacy that has long plagued the use of AEDs. Our community CPR and AED responder pilot program will train volunteer community CPR AED responders who will be dispatched at the same time as our EMS system. We look to train 125 community responders equipped with an AED, 500 people trained to provide CPR while actually part of the EMS response, and we will work with our community responders to actually recruit volunteer responders. The FirstAED crowdsourcing device is very simple. It's a software device that will help these volunteers locate the position of the closest CPR responder, also provide instructions on the role they'll play, providing CPR or applying the AED, provide directions to the emergency location, and provide a linkage to us in accessing support after an incident actually occurs. So it'll allow these community responders to get to the scene quicker in these small communities. And this has been shown to be successful in small portions of Europe. It's been shown to be successful in small areas in the US. None has looked at it the way we're looking at it here. So our current notification process is very simple. Right now, you call 911, we send a fire truck, we send an ambulance to a cardiac arrest, and we actually perform a resuscitation in those cases. The new process would, in fact, still send the 911 responder, but at the same time, we would send our community responders who may be right in the area of a cardiac arrest to perform CPR, apply an AED earlier, and improve survival from cardiac arrest. It's a really innovative approach to actually getting an AED to patients earlier. So that's part one. The second part is how do we improve outcomes from rural cardiac arrest around the world? No matter where you live in a rural community, difficulty in terms of getting a pre-hospital provider to the scene in a short time frame. We know already that time from first collapse to shock is the most critical component of survival, and can you get AEDs to providers earlier in communities that actually are in the rural setting? Drone delivery AEDs are coming, and the research is actually ready to go. So for drones, for those who don't know anything about drones, they're really unmanned air vehicles. Initially, they were only tested in parts of the world for medical devices and medication use. Much of the early testing was actually impacted by the FAA and Transport Canada restriction on airspace, but many of those restrictions have actually improved over time, and Canada is actually a leader in drone technology.
Drones have the potential to carry drugs to scene, blood to trauma, victims. They visualize areas that are not easily seen by rescuers. They have great potential. And what do they look like? So many of you may have seen drones in your backyard. You can see this is very, very different from what most of us usually see. Take a look at this one. That looks like an airplane. That's in fact a drone or an unmanned air vehicle. When we actually look at the types of drones we want to use in this particular research, the drones we're using are in fact beyond visual line of sight. So these are not drones that you can fly in your backyard with an AED. These drones are launched by a central station, not unlike launching a plane from an airport. So it's centrally controlled with the same parametrics to actually do that. The drones fly very quickly, 120 kilometers an hour. I have no ambulance that goes that quickly. And it actually has no stop signs, so it actually moves fairly quickly. Sense and avoid, detect and avoid, these all have technologies to ensure that they don't run into anything on the way to the actual cardiac arrest. So the technologies are incredible. So if we look at who's using drones today, Staples, Google, Amazon, using drones to actually deliver commercial products. Look at the medical uses of drones that are up there that have been used around the world. But my interest is the final one, AEDs to victims of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So I was part of a team at University of Toronto that actually did this initial drone-based research. And what we did was we looked in Southern Ontario. We looked at over 50,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests over an 8-year time frame. And we looked at situating drones within the region, and we looked at actually seeing whether we could decrease response time by 1, 2, or 3 minutes, and look at the number of drones you would require to, in fact, do that. So when you look at this graph, what you see is if you increase the number of drones, look what happens to your dotted line, the 90th percentile, look what happens to your median. You significantly shrink response time. In fact, we found that 90th percentile AED arrival would decrease by 6 minutes, rural response time would decrease by 10 minutes through use of a drone for cardiac arrest. Ladies and gentlemen, there's very little that'll decrease response time by 10 minutes and very little that'll improve cardiac arrest survival if in fact that can be done as part of a true EMS response. How would this actually work? So what would happen is a 911 call would come into the dispatch. The call would be routed to the drone dispatch, and you can see the drone dispatch is not different very much from the 911 dispatch station. The drone would be activated and launched from an EMS base. The drone would take off to the location of the cardiac arrest. The drone would land. The bystander would remove the AED from the drone and apply it to the patient, and everyone goes home happy. I love that slide. In such a simplistic world, wouldn't that be great? But that would be what we're actually trying to achieve in this particular process. So, does it work in real time? Let's take a look.
It's my dad. I think he had a heart attack. Please help. He's not breathing anymore.
Please stay calm. What's your name?
Joanna.
Good. Joanna, we've got your location. The ambulance drone is on its way. Remove his top shirt to uncover his torso.
Okay.
Great. Can you go to the nearest exit? The ambulance drone is almost there.
Okay. I'm outside.
I'll be talking through the drone now, so you can put down the phone. Now please pick up the drone and bring it to your father. You're doing great. Okay, pull the green lid. Now place the pads on your father's chest. Good. I can see that the pads are properly applied. Joanna, please stay clear of your father. We'll take it from here.
So that was beautiful. That's exactly what we see that we'd like to do here. The issue is that wasn't perfect. And why wasn't that perfect? That wasn't perfect because the person who went to get the drone stopped doing CPR. And that's the kick. And that's the one situation that I want our research to explore. How do you handle those situations? So I came up with the answer today. We would only actually send the drone if there was a minimum of 2 bystanders. One person to do CPR, one person to deliver the drone. If there's one bystander, it becomes too difficult to do that scenario, and you don't want to interrupt CPR in those situations. So that was great, but it wasn't perfect. So we can do better, and I think that's what we want to look at. The program that I've called this is actually called the AED on the Fly program. I've made multiple grant applications to many interested agencies. It is a hope that the grant funding will allow us to do the research with the Council's blessing in the region of Peel. So in closing, our current system provides superb rates of survival from cardiac arrest. We are leaders in cardiac arrest survival around the world, and we have been for a long time. But we can and we will do better. I think innovation is a hallmark of what we do at Peel Regional Paramedic Service. The Community Responder AED program, to me, is one of our most innovative programs to date. And we need to understand that success here really will change the approach to cardiac arrest around the world. This is not just about rural communities in Peel Region. This is about Indigenous communities. These are about rural communities that have no access to this type of care. That's what I want to be able to start in Peel Region, and I'm proud to lead this research. I thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, and we have them. Councillors Raz, then Mayor Thompson. Councillor Raz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Cheskas, for coming today. Over
Oh,
here.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I think I mentioned it here at council before. 10 years ago, my dad was suffered a cardiac arrest, and there was a kid who was recently certified in CPR that saved his life. But this is that next stage for those who are by giving them that. The extra time and that extra support that we may save more lives. With respect to some of the challenges, what kind of work are you doing with Transport Canada, or what kind of support are they providing?
So Transport Canada works with the drone company that I work with, which is called Drone Delivery Canada. They've worked with us on all the issues related to this particular project. So all regulatory support would have to be in place for this to happen, and that regulatory support has been granted. So they work with Transport Canada, NAV Canada, the Research Council of Canada. All those groups work with the drone company that we're actually working with. So they've already launched flights in the northern part of Canada, so the Moosonee and Moose Factory, because what they wanted to see is, it's nice to have a drone fly in nice conditions. What about when you're minus 30 degrees? Will the drone fly? And in fact, it does, and it does it well. But also, they had to get the clearance from Transport Canada, NAV Canada, to fly a drone where there's other airspace. So those are the things that we have been working in the background for years to bring this to you today. So we have all that regulatory support through the drone company.
Okay, that's good to know that's being worked through. I guess one of my other question is rural versus urban. In an urban environment, we're increasingly becoming more dense, taller buildings. How would the drone companies who have to fly through an urban setting, would they be above those towers or within? Because in Mississauga, we're going to be getting our first 80-story tower. So I'm just wondering how that's going to work.
My honest answer is we're not there yet.
Okay.
My honest answer is the following. Drone companies will tell you whatever they want to tell you. The bottom line is you can't fly a drone downtown Toronto. The wind shear, the other things that are in that particular area will not allow a drone to get into those huge high-rise places right now. Technology may change, but there's other solutions in those particular areas. Can you put an AED on elevators? Can you put them in other areas where they're increasingly accessed? But a drone solution in an urban center right now, I think is going to need further technology to get there. We're not there yet, but I think it'll get there, as we see with technology at all times.
Okay. Well, I look forward to the outcomes, and thank you for your continued work in this space. You're an amazing individual. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson.
Thank you very much, and we're finally here. I've been waiting for this for a while. I know we've been talking about this for a few years now, and I'm glad that we're finally getting closer. And I'll tell you, Callan, in the report, Mr. Chairman, I'll gladly move it. I think this is something that's extremely important. Callan's early in innovators anyway, so I think it's got a good fit. But with our terrain that we have with the Trans-Canada Trailway, different areas that we have along the escarpment, I think this is something that can be extremely useful. We did have one instance where there was a heart attack, and a young lad was able to, his grandfather had it out in the field with, his grandfather was in the combine. He was able to go through the OnStar that his mom showed him in the pickup truck, which
Yeah.
our guys came through.
That's
Thumbs up.
fantastic.
So, I mean, those are stories, but just think what this can do is the next new phase that I think is extremely important. Question I have is, what is the cost of these drones that you have? The technology, do you have a price range, or do they have?
So the drones are owned by the drone company. The cost of the program will be borne by the drone company. In my discussions with them, they have guaranteed me it'll be less expensive than what we're doing right now. So I don't think there'll be a huge cost to it. I think we need to focus on who we're going to be sending the drones to, and it'll be generally done on a per-cost basis, but the cost will not be excessive.
Well, I think that's, I like the way you framed it up, and I think that's important for the public to understand.
No,
And at anything, you know, cost of one defibrillator is nothing once you save a life, so.
The cost of me sending a drone will be well paid by the saving of 5 more lives in the town of Caledon.
There you go.
And so that's how I would sort of think of that. And not only the town of Caledon, but other rural communities that could benefit from this. So we're looking at the county of Renfrew has done also good work in this, so we're partnering in our work, so we'll actually be able to quicken the pace of our research. So we're leaders in this, and we'd like to continue to be that and provide this particular service.
Well, I can say as the mayor, we're willing to work with you to see what we can do to enhance lives that much better. So thank you so much for, I'm glad we're finally here. I've been waiting for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The CAO has a quick comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the next frontier, and we're very excited about being part of this pilot. But I was chatting with Paul and Katie before the meeting, and the basic public AED program that council supported and put in place a number of years ago, the first year we used it, AEDs were used 12 times. Now they're being used once every 7 days in Peel. So it's gone from being used once a month to once a week. And I think that Paul said that the survival rate is about 60% from the use. So it's wonderful to see the program such a success to date, and council's innovative approach to supporting that program, and now to see it move to the next frontier is really wonderful to see.
Thank you. Councillor Sato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Always good to see you here.
Thank you so much.
It's amazing how far we have come since you first sat here and talked about AEDs and CPR, and we do our CPR training and the AED training once a year for members of council. And I really want to applaud our staff out there. You know, they've taken it out into the community, and the support from the residents has been absolutely phenomenal. But I think one of the best things we ever did, and this was our paramedics, when we looked at using the app, and it wasn't Pulse Point, was it? It was the other app that listed the AEDs. I can't actually find it on my phone anymore, so I'm not sure what happened. But they realized that we actually did not have a full listing of all of the AEDs and how fresh the batteries were. So our paramedics went out and they did an inventory, and that is something that I think was really very, I don't want to say innovative, but a very creative approach. And you know, it was our staff who did it. They decided that they needed to know exactly where they were and how old they were. So, you know, you've been a real leader in this.
Thank you.
And this is just the next step. It was interesting. Last night I was a judge at a Dragon's Den type of startup competition. And one of the presenters, one of the teams, and they were all youth, one of the presentations they made was for, they kind of called it an airbag for drones. And they were pointing out the number of drones that crash. And they had all of these statistics and the damage that they could do to people on the ground and also to the drone itself. And of course, the cost is high. So when I was reading the report and then I listened to them, and I'm thinking, I hope we have an airbag around our drones. So though the AEDs are fully encased. So they would obviously be protected. But
Yeah.
this is the way of getting the AEDs out to people directly and quickly. And I really just want to applaud the staff that, you've been very innovative and taking the next step to save lives. And we know they save lives. So thank you for all that you've done.
Thank you so much, Councillor Sato. Interesting, if I could comment, because last year we presented, I'm part of a research team that presented at St. Michael's Hospital. It's called Angel's Den. And we were in the finals of a competition, and what we were pitching was called AED on the Go. And what AED on the Go was the following. We developed an invention that when a cardiac arrest happened in an area, the AED on the wall would start flashing and announce, "Take me, cardiac arrest in the area." So we didn't win, but we got to the finals out of about 100 different applicants, so we were very happy about that. So these are the types of things. We're trying to change the way AEDs are being used. We feel that what's being done right now is good, but we can do better. And I think that's the issue that we want to try to push forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downey.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Cheskis. I'm wondering what resources or through your grant funding, what's being allocated to, I don't want to say normalize, but give the users of the AED that confidence level that you're talking about. Like you said through your presentation, that oftentimes people don't use them because they're intimidated by them.
Yeah.
What can we do even to help you through that from our standpoint, and maybe through social media or other avenues to help people become comfortable with them?
Yeah, so that's fantastic, and that's a great question. So what we've planned in our AED program is the following. The drone, when it will land, will actually have the AED, and these are the feasibility issues we need to work on. Do you land the drone, or do you tether the drone and tether the AED from the drone to the ground? Bystander picks it up. On the AED, we're going to have a smartphone application where our staff will actually be speaking to the bystander and say, take the AED to the patient. Then they're going to guide them through the process, just like you saw on the TV there. So it'll be guided through a smartphone application that will give them the confidence to do what they have to do in a moment of need. What we've learned is the following, and we've tried this before. You think that we'd had patients who sustained heart attacks, and we sent those families home with AEDs. And what we found was that we didn't improve survival when those family members had cardiac arrest, because they're at high risk. Why didn't they improve survival? Because the families froze at the time of action. No matter what we taught them, when it was their loved one passing away in front of them, they couldn't react. That's why the voluntary responder may be a better response to that. That's why the crowdsource application applied to the AED will guide them through in a time of need. So I think we've thought that through, and hopefully it'll be successful.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, Dr. Cheskis, I thank you for your presentation. I have a motion before me moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Raz, and we're dealing with the 9-1 and bringing forward Report 11.1 forward, that the paramedic services be authorized to participate in a study to determine the effectiveness of a volunteer community responder cardiopulmonary resuscitation CPR and public access defibrillator program utilizing the FirstAED mobile application. And further, that paramedic services be authorized to participate in a research study led by Dr. Cheskis as principal researcher to study the effectiveness of an automated external defibrillator drone delivery in the town of Caledon. You've heard the motion. Recorded vote.
Is that good if you get green?
Yes. And even better when it's unanimous.
Yeah,
congratulations, Dr. Cheskis.
Thank you so much.
Carry
Thank
on
you so
and
much
good luck
for your
with your
time.
very good works. Thank you.
Okay.
Our next
Thank you.
delegation is Pastor Randy Nielsen, Brampton Bramley Christian Fellowship Residences, providing information regarding the Brampton Bramley Christian Fellowship Resident Affordable Housing Project, and we will deal with Report 11.1 at this time as well. Pastor Nielsen, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and councillors and staff. It's an honor to be here before you today. As you can see on the screen, we're actively involved to put together an affordable housing project. It's been an interesting journey, starting in 2007 and up until now. Wonderful cooperation from regional staff and city staff and, as well. Our goal is to provide 89 units of affordable housing for the region of Peel and the city of Brampton. 45 of those would remove folks off of the centralized wait list. The remaining would be for two-bedroom units for a little larger groups, to be able to remove them, some perhaps off the centralized wait list. We'll wait and see on that, but the remainder of lower income housing. But it didn't all start here. My wife and I were in Fort Lauderdale, Florida in 2005, enjoying ourselves, pastoring a church. The people thought we were working too hard. We thought we were semi-retired. Then we got a call from Brampton, from the founder of the church, Bramley Christian Fellowship, to ask if we'd come back to Brampton. And we felt that would please God. So when we came back, we discovered we couldn't buy a house here. We had to rent. And we found that things had changed. My wife had been a Brampton resident from 1955 until I swept her off her feet and took her away in '68. But coming back, the city had changed dramatically, and our congregation was mainly made up of first-generation Canadians, immigrants from now over 30 different national backgrounds. And we discovered perhaps there's something we could do. The founder of the church had purchased 10 acres of land, 8 that were usable, had a church building that would seat about 250 on it. And I started the process of moving towards affordable housing. That had been my desire to see a church that served the community. We became part of the Area 48 landowners group and continued to contribute to that so that we were in the mix of what was happening in the area. We discovered that if you look at the map in front of you, on the right side is airport, left is Bramley Road, and the ellipse in the center on the left-hand side, we're in the center of it, and they called it the village core. Even though it was all greenfield at the time and people regularly got lost trying to find us, we felt that God had strategically placed us in a location where we could better serve the community. Since that time, the community's grown up. The district retail development has matured. We've actually added on to our church building and strategically put a gym in so that we could serve the community instead of just a larger worship space. What you see before you is another phase to our construction, which will be completed in 3 or 4 years. We believe that it'll give more space, not just for Sunday, but for community use. So being in the center of the community, we wanted to add value in the best way we could. We looked at our land, and you can see it before you. That's an aerial view over the Walmart Plaza. We originally started looking at the left-hand side, close to the storm pond, and figured that would be the best place, the easiest place for an affordable housing building. And we did our proposal through the RFP process 2016, and were successful. But then as we went through more discussion with the city and discussion with surrounding landowners and consideration, we felt the actual best place for a 6-story affordable housing building that would be 90 units would be on the corner of Inspire Boulevard and Bramley Road. That necessitated now moving the Heritage House that had been there, Griffin Archdeacon home from around 1865, to move it to another location and then relocate it back into the area. We discovered that as a church, we don't have the finances to do that. It's not our core business, so I hope we found a development partner that was interested in perhaps doing some housing on the site as well, considering how we could add value to the community. And because of my involvement with the landowners, became aware of the provincial growth plan, et cetera. And we looked to see how we can work together with the community to benefit. And what the result is to date is that this is what the artist's conception of our final project would look like. The Heritage House will be relocated onto Bramley Road adjacent to the church and be refurbished and utilized as a amenity space for the affordable housing building, as well as some office space for the church. In between that building, the Heritage House and the main building will be an outdoor amenity area that'll be utilized by the residents through the planning process and working with the urban design people and such. The building has certainly been enhanced, and all of those enhancements, of course, have added increased value to the building as well as cost to the building. This is what we anticipate it'll look like as we move ahead. We've really seen that this, to do something of this scope as a nonprofit and as a charity, in fact, has been an exercise that was far beyond what I anticipated. We don't have skilled people amongst the church, and so we've really relied upon others around us, including city staff. The regional staff have been phenomenal with Marwan Kassé and Brett Barnes really helping me, giving confidence to move ahead. We've secured, through your generosity, the IAH funding that is now at $13.35 million. We've, as of yesterday, received a deferral for the DCs from the City of Brampton until 1 year after our occupancy of the building. We've received confirmation from CMHC through their direct funding stream that we will receive a 50-year amortization mortgage, 10-year term, 2 10-year terms. So that's brought stability in to ensure that from a cash flow point of view, everything can work together. Even the Area 48 landowners have waived their cost-sharing obligations for the property since it's a community asset in affordable housing. The group that we've been working with, Live Communities, has assisted us throughout the project. Again, as a charity, we don't have funds to put into this. We found it very challenging. They have actually advanced more than $1 million just in the soft cost up until this date without any permits in hand. That's how much it's cost, almost $1.2 million. So it's really a challenge, especially for nonprofits, to do this. But with everybody working together, it's come to the place where we're before you today. We're looking at a cohesive community in that area. Many have asked, why couldn't we do larger units than 1 and 2 bedrooms? Just with the economics, it didn't seem feasible, but we looked with our partners of Live Communities, how can it happen? They've come forward with a design, and we'll be presenting that to City, and through the planning process, it's already begun to utilize our additional lands for mixed use, as in a multiplicity of residential units. So there'll be mid-rise on Inspire Boulevard and Stack Towns and other products on our property, and potentially the adjacent Smart Center's temporary storm pond will be reconverted once Inspire Boulevard is complete. So we're looking at a cohesive community where the church itself will be a community hub. Right now we have almost every Saturday, we have in excess of 100 children in there doing free basketball programs. The girls love the dance. In fact, they're growing faster than the boys are in that. We have community fitness for seniors already in there. And we're looking at the church being a hub of the community in the village core in North Brampton. It seems it's been a puzzle to put together. It's been an exercise in patience and endurance, and all of the puzzle pieces are together. And I believe the last piece is what we're requesting from you, the additional funding to bring it all together. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. That's my presentation. And
thank you for your presentation. There are questions. Councillor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pastor Nielsen, I just want to congratulate you on all of the work that you've done. A church is usually a place for bringing together people of faith. It seems that you have brought together all of the necessary planning and skills required to make a plan like this come to fruition. This is a project that will benefit everyone in the city and across the region. And so I just want to commend you and also thank staff for the work that they've done to make this come to pass. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And I know that Councillor Dillon may have some comments on this, as this is in his area. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Parrish.
Yes, I really want to thank you. I don't think people understand the complexity of these projects. We get a dream and we say it's going to work. I went through this with a building when I was on council the first time on Credit View in Eglinton, and every single turn there seemed to be another glitch in the operation, so I admire your patience and your persistence. One of the questions I'm happy if someone moves, I guess Councillor Dillon will move that we grant your request. I'm happy to support that. I'm curious about the CMHC low-interest loans. I've been reading about them in the paper lately, and I think the motion that's attached further in the report says that we lend you the money, our non-forgivable money. Is there been any exploration, and it might be from our staff, to get an additional CMHC loan and use their money, and then when it's time to pay it back, we pay it back? Is that 2%?
If I may respond, Chair. We have gone through their co-investment fund, and they are granting us a $13 million mortgage on the building, which will be at 1% more than the 10-year bond rate, which will be, which I think is around 1.7 right now, which would be a 2.7% mortgage. They'll also grant us $750,000 as a forgivable loan as well, and we plan to put that towards solar on the roof to enhance the energy footprint on the building. We've, in our discussion with them, from our perspective at least, we've exhausted what they're able to offer us.
Okay, I'd like to go beyond you to staff then, if I could, because I had a developer in my office yesterday that's building affordable rental building in my area. And he said that the CMHC new funds that were just made available recently are at 2%. So that sounds better than what you're getting. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to staff, I see the motion is to provide a forgivable loan, and I have no problem with that, but also seems kind of smart to me that we would get that loan through CMHC at 2%, and then we pay it back.
So through the chair, the forgivable loan portion is us borrowing money from our own reserves, so we are able to do that.
At zero interest?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say zero. Steve will correct me on that, but at very low interest. So
Is it below 2%?
I don't have the details in front of me, but certainly it's a cost opportunity, so the money's provided up front. How the returns would be, I mean, interest rates are ultimately low right now. I think if I were to look at last year's performance, we are slightly below 2%.
Okay, thank you. And I'm also wondering, since Brampton forgave the DCs, whether there's a motion afoot somewhere in the room to forgive the regional DCs on this? If you need a motion, I'm happy to do it, or Councillor Dillon can do it, but...
Councillor Parrish, the CAO might like to speak to that very point. I still have you on the list. Go ahead.
Sorry, it's just a minor point. Brampton deferred payment for a year, I believe. They didn't forgive them.
Okay. Well, we're a little more generous in Mississauga. We forgive them. Actually, we give them a grant in lieu of. So I'll just sit back and mind my own business. It's Brampton. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Nielsen, for your, I just wanted to echo what Councillor Vicente said, and I'm sure all of our colleagues on Brampton Council agree. We want to congratulate you for your hard work and perseverance on this project and never giving up, and also to staff at the region for finding the creative solutions in order to make sure that this project comes through. I too support the recommendations, and happy to hear that our council colleagues around the table are interested in the DCs being forgiven at the region as well. Thank you, and I'm assuming that Councillor Dillon will be moving the receipt of your report.
Thank you. Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. First of all, to Pastor Rainey Nielsen, thank you for your creative work in trying to find new ways to provide affordable housing in the region of Peel. And I know this has been a real passion. Your congregation wants to contribute and help the region of Peel. And I just want to commend you on that. And I know you faced some obstacles in trying to realize this vision for the community, but you've been persistent to the point that the City of Brampton Council couldn't say no to you, because we know you kept on coming back, and if we didn't say yes, then you just come back again. And you have to admire that type of persistence, especially when it comes to something as important as affordable housing, when we all know we have a real problem with the lack of affordable housing. And so I know this second component in terms of the regional deferral or forgiveness is integral for your ability to make this happen. And so I just wanted to ask you, is this, if the first necessary element was the Brampton deferral, would you view this as the second component that is necessary to make this happen?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Brown, I think it goes beyond that. This is a puzzle, and we have one piece left. And if this piece doesn't come together, then the puzzle doesn't work. And so then we go back to the drawing board. So I'm very happy to hear and observe the wonderful support of the Regional Council. Thank you.
And just to say, I know this has been a real passion on our Brampton Council with Councillor Gurpreet Dillon, and it's heartening to hear Councillor Parrish talk about the need that I know a few weeks ago we were asking you a lot of questions about a project in Mississauga, but when you see that type of support for a project in Brampton, just want to say we appreciate it.
Thank you. Councillor Dillon.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just want to thank you for coming, and I've had an opportunity to attend some of the church services and seen a lot of the work that you guys have done, and I think what you do is really what you do is close your eyes to anybody who comes, and it's people from all different communities, all walks of life, all colors, all backgrounds, all religions, and so I'd like to move. I know Councillor Parrish had mentioned. I'd like to move forgiveness, and so. I'd like to see what some of the other councillors have to say, and then I'll let the discussion go forward.
Thank you. Perhaps Stephen might like a comment on that as well as Janice. So I'll take you in turn on that suggestion about the forgiveness through to the CFO.
Through the chair, thank you. Just to provide some clarity, if you look on the report on page 1113, the total fees and permits are approximately $3.8 million for this initiative, this project. The forgivable loan, which is effectively a grant, is in the amount of $4.2 million. So in effect, it is covering the cost of those development charges. So this $4.2 million solves the financing problems that this proponent has for this particular project.
Commissioner Shia, you came off the list, and I think you would have shared that sentiment.
Yes, thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Very good. So that leads me to believe we have the appropriate motion before the chair. Councillor Dillon, you still have the floor.
So I'd like to move the motion then.
Very good. Seeing no other speakers, the motion I have before me, moved by Councillor Dillon, seconded by Councillor Parrish, that staff be authorized to increase the funding provided to Brampton Bramalea Christian Fellowship Residence Limited for the development of a 6-story residential apartment building with 89 affordable rental housing units located in Brampton, Ontario, the project, through a regional forgivable loan in the amount of up to $4,222,255 pursuant to document 2016-599P and in accordance with Procurement Bylaw 30-2018. And further, that the Commissioner of Human Services be authorized to execute a regional forgivable loan agreement, together with such further agreements and documents as deemed necessary or advisable, with Brampton Bramalea Christian Fellowship Resident Limited to provide funding for the project in the amount of up to $4,222,255 on business terms satisfactory to the Commissioner of Human Services and on legal terms satisfactory to the regional solicitor. And further, that capital project 175038 be revised to $17,578,255 to account for the additional $4,288,255 of regional funding allocated to the project. You have heard the motion. It is a recorded vote. And with that, I believe it carries unanimously. Pastor Nielsen, congratulations to you and yours. And if the chair has permitted one comment, you've heard me and I won't belabor it. When we talk about these files and my frustration at the two fundamental points I always make when we're dealing with our most important file of all, so many of the pundits are talking about affordable housing and they meet supported housing. So many are talking about supported housing and they meet affordable housing. And as I always say, as supported by whom? Today it's the region of Peel. And I hope our provincial and federal friends are listening, because if we only get 8 to 10 cents on the dollar and we can step up like this and walk the walk, we continue to need more help from our provincial and federal friends, because the region of Peel does its part. Well done to all of you. Thank you, and congratulations again, Pastor. Okay, moving on. That concludes the delegations. I am on to staff presentations. 8.1, density and intensification targets. How do they work? An oral presentation by Steve Jacks, Chief Planner and Director of Regional Planning and Growth Management, who, as he's coming forward, I'll thank for the 90 minutes he gave me yesterday for a better understanding of this file and others. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair, members of Regional Council. I have Adrian Smith with me, the Manager of Policy in Regional Planning and Growth Management. So today what we're going to talk about is density and intensification and how they work in the region of Peel. So the population and employment is based on the distributions that the province decides on to give to each municipality across the province. And it's based on the people that live in the region as well as the jobs that will be located in the region. So as you see here, and I'm sure you're all familiar with these are the council-approved 2041 population and employment allocations for the region of Peel. We expect the region to grow by 500,000 people and 250,000 jobs between now and 2041. These endorsed area municipal allocations are the basis for the work that Regional Planning and Growth Management has been conducting over the past few years. Through the growth plan, the province sets population and employment allocations for the region across Ontario and establishes the planning horizon for growth. The role of municipalities is to ensure through their official plan that they can accommodate that growth during the planning time horizon, which is currently 2041. In Peel, we are achieving this through our official plan conformity work as well as through a municipal comprehensive review. In doing so, we are ensuring that Peel remains a desirable place to live and work, and including and making sure that our infrastructure is well planned, in place in a timely manner, and is financially sustainable. So let's look at what intensification is. Intensification relates to new development that takes place in the currently built-up areas of the region and allows for accommodating population growth within existing urban areas, requiring less greenfield, and increases the uses of transportation, transit, walking, and cycling. Minimum targets are set to make efficient use of land as well as infrastructure. Intensification occurs through the reuse, redevelopment or development, infill, or conversion of land or buildings that can take on any housing form, but in a compact nature. It's measured as a portion of all units being added to the region in the built-up area, and as per Council's direction on the 28th, at 50%. So what is density? Density is a number of people and jobs occupying a given land area. Minimum density targets are set to manage the amount of land needed to accommodate people and jobs, as well as achieve compact urban form. Density informs the type of development on land in both the built-up areas and greenfield areas. As the number of people and job changes up or down on parcels of land, it will change the housing form that is required to accommodate them. It's measured as the number of people and jobs covering a hectare of land, so it's PPJH. You'll see that a lot in the presentation. So now let's look at it in the context of Peel. So the built-up area. The built-up boundary shown here is important because provincial intensification targets apply directly to this area. The built-up area is currently defined as the area that was considered built by the province when the 2006 growth plan came into effect. This area still includes lots that are not developed and would be developed through infill, much like Lakeview. You'll notice on the western portion of Mississauga, there's a gap That's Churchill Meadows, and at 2006, it hadn't been developed. The designated greenfield area, or DGA, is for new residential and employment areas to accommodate future growth that are outside of Peel's built-up area, but within the urban boundary. It should be noted that based on the region's proposed target of 50% for new DGA lands, we will need new lands to accommodate growth and employment to 2041. If you recall, there was a discussion on February 28th requesting that the province update the built-up area boundary. Based on preliminary work by staff, this is approximately what it would look like as of 2018. As you can see, almost 50% of Peel's original 2006 designated greenfield area has been built, and we are halfway through our planning horizon of 2006 to 2031 period, which means we are on track with our growth and our land requirements. Let's look at intensification. As we turn our attention to intensification targets, we'll see how they are currently phased in the region's official plan. In the current official plan, there is a minimum intensification target of 40% to the year 2026. This increases to 50% between 2026 and 2031 under our current official plan. It then gradually increases to a minimum of 60% between 2031 and 2041. In all instances, remaining growth will be in the designated greenfield area. So how are we doing? Well, over the last 12 years, Peel has achieved a cumulative intensification rate of 41% between 2006 and 2018. So we're meeting the target within our current official plan. It should be noted, though, over the last 3 years, the intensification rate is trending upwards. If you look at the years 2016 to 2018, we were achieving 44%. And if you look at 2018 alone, we've achieved 56%. So let's take a look at what this would look like in some of our communities. So here are some artist rendering of what intensification would look like in the built form for Lakeview Inspiration and Dundas Connects. But these aren't the only intensification projects that are happening. You have a 19-story building in Mississauga on Eglinton Avenue of 311 units that is going in infill. Mineola Stack Towns in Cawthra of 148 units. So it's taking various forms outside of these areas as well. A look at Brampton, their 2040 vision for Shoppers World and Queen and Kennedy. There's also infill development happening with 13-unit affordable housing townhouse project at McLaughlin and 34 townhouse units in downtown Brampton as examples. In Caledon, intensification is much more gentle due to its nature. There's an artist rendering if a lot was split, what two-story houses would look like occupying that lot. And in Bolton, the St. Anne project, which was proposed as a 5-story building, and how that would be achieved in the municipality. Now, if we turn our attentions to density, in the current official plan, there is a minimum of 50 people and jobs per hectare, and Council's direction has recommended to remain that. I want to draw your attention to our little box there with houses and buildings and little industrial warehouse buildings that look like that. This really shows you in a 1-acre block the type of housing form that would be needed to accommodate that type of population. Remember, these numbers are averages across the region and not in any specific location. And in our current official plan, we have minimum municipal targets for each municipality. So Mississauga at 77 ppj per hectare, Brampton at 51, and Caledon at 42. It should be noted that the 2017 growth plan, when it was released, has a minimum target of 60 people and jobs per hectare for existing designated greenfield area, and 80 for any new land requirements that would be added to the DGA. This is much higher than the current target in our official plan, so we were very pleased to see that the province was proposing under Amendment Number 1 to decrease that to 60. The direction from Council, we've requested that they decrease it to 50 for the region. At the current phased designated density target of 50 or 60, we will still need additional land to accommodate growth to 2041. So at 50 people and jobs per hectare, the land requirement would be roughly 1,900 hectares of net new land to accommodate growth to 2041. At 60, if it were to remain as proposed by the province, that would drop slightly to 1,600 new net hectares to accommodate to 2041. So what does densities look like in the region? So Caledon in Mayfield West is currently achieving 43 people and jobs per hectare, which is 3.4 people per year. And by the time Mayfield West is completely built out, they should achieve 50. Bram East has achieved 58 people and jobs per hectare at a PPU, persons per unit, of 4.28. In Springdale, has achieved 65 at a PPU of 4.3 people per unit. In Mississauga, Churchill Meadows, which is now developed, achieved 85 people and persons per jobs per hectare with a persons per unit of 3.6. And if we look at Mount Pleasant, it's achieved 60 with a people per unit of 4.3, and by the time Mount Pleasant is fully built out, we expect that number to be quite high, around 80. So when we look at Caledon and we start to look at our built-up area, what does density look like in that? Caledon East has 18 people and jobs per hectare, but it's achieving a 3.2 persons per unit. In Bolton, they're achieving 43 PPJ per hectare with 3.3 people per unit. In Mississauga, in Meadowvale, they're achieving 59 people per persons and jobs per hectare at a persons per unit of 3.0. And what I would point out here to look at is the variety of housing form that is needed to accommodate those types of densities. It also provides a lot of choice for residents in the region of Peel and the type of unit that they would like to live in. We look at Brampton. Downtown is achieving 121 people and jobs per hectare with 1.8 people per unit. And again, the variety of density, the variety of housing form that's able to achieve that. And when we look at Mississauga, Port Credit is achieving 152 people and jobs per hectare at a PPU of 1.8 persons per unit. And again, I'd just like to point out, focus in on the variety of housing form that is taken to achieve that in creating desirable and livable communities. And then we look at Mississauga City Centre Core, which is at 230 people and jobs per hectare, achieving a persons per unit of 2.0. So although density intensification are ways to measure what is being achieved for new development and growth, it isn't necessarily the only factors to make those decisions. We must consider other factors including mixed uses, opportunities for employment, connectivity to transit, safe and active transportation options in every neighborhood, services and amenities, livable and healthy environments, access to affordable housing, efficient use of infrastructure, and through community involvement and engagement with our stakeholders, we're ensuring that all these elements are included in creating complete communities in the region of Peel. Thank you very much.
Thank you and well done. I see no questions. Oh, Councillor Santos.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Just a quick question about the built-in or built-up areas. I know that they're doing well, and you mentioned the variety of housing forms that help to accommodate those built-up development areas. Just wondering, in terms of infill and trying to create more varieties within those built-up development areas, if there's possibilities, since mostly in those, I'm looking at the downtown Brampton area where Councillor Vicente and I represent. It's next to transit, there's like shops everywhere, it's more pedestrian friendly than anywhere else. And there are opportunities for infill to increase the variety of housing there. Just wondering what your comments are on that and whether or not, what the possibilities are and what are the barriers that are preventing us from building within the built-up development areas?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, certainly there are significant opportunities for infill and intensification, and you see in the targets that the region has achieved over the 40% target annually in that intensification. So there are many opportunities in places like downtown Brampton, downtown Mississauga. There's lots of planning going on in areas like the reimagining the mall, Lakeview, and in our transit corridors and major transit station areas. So both the area municipalities and the region are doing extensive sort of plans, master planning to achieve those intensification targets. In terms of some of the barriers, there's market forces in terms of land economics, and there's infrastructure challenges. One of the challenges in attracting the market and in realizing some of those intensification opportunities is delivering on our transit infrastructure. And I guess we're lucky in Peel that there are a whole series of planning initiatives and funding coming forward, but there's always more that can be done.
So when you're talking about market sort of barriers and challenges and interest because of transit, whatever, what you just said, if there are developers who are interested in those infill projects, are those, like, should we be seizing on those opportunities if they are few and far between?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, I think absolutely. The future of the region is depending on both the greenfield development and the intensification units for delivering on the complete communities that we talk about. Now, we should be working to deliver on those objectives, but also the way in which that development happens in our communities and the amenities that it brings, the urban design, and the way that it accommodates infrastructure is important as well. So we need to get the details right as well. And I know our local municipalities are very effective at working to achieve that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mayor Crombie for idea 4.
Me already. Okay. First of all, on the density targets, so they have been downgraded since the previous government's goals. That's fine. Are we looked at as a totality, as a region, or does each town municipality have their own targets and goals? Because certainly, you know, ours are a little higher, obviously, because we're embracing more density intensification, a little lower than Caledon. So are we, as a region, are we achieving the goals? So we're looked at as a region, not each town or municipality has those specific goals they have to meet.
Yeah, we're looking at it on an average for the region. By the province, we're asked to achieve that regionally through the municipality. So the regional municipality is expected to achieve their density, the targets that they set.
Okay, you're mixing up both words. So the region is accountable for the goal, or each municipality?
The region in totality is expected to achieve that goal.
Okay. So that's interesting, because we overachieve and then, not overachieve, but we have more density, so our numbers are higher. And then, of course, Caledon's we saw are much lower. So, okay. Well, that's interesting. On transit corridors, you haven't explained, because that's much higher, isn't it? 200 people or jobs per hectare?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we've talked about a little bit about the density for greenfield. Within the built-up area, there are different targets that the province applies. So for urban growth centers, so downtown in the central area of Brampton and Mississauga, in Peel's case, the target is 200 people and jobs per hectare.
I don't think I saw that on your presentation, though.
We didn't get into that level of detail, but absolutely those are targets that have to be met. And there are also separate targets for major transit station areas as well.
Correct. And they higher than 200?
They're 150 and 160, depending on the type of infrastructure.
Right. Well, we were looking at 60 in growth areas, greenfield areas. So conversely, in higher transit corridors, they're 200. We probably should have included that information too. Okay, on the second chart, third chart, the one with the population and employment numbers, a little concerned about the employment gap that exists. Because we're almost 500,000 jobs in Mississauga now. So what, and who can explain the employment base and how that can grow and where that's at? Chapman.
So through you, Mr. Chairman, so what you see here are the population and employment forecasts that the region has been working on with local municipalities and other stakeholders through our growth management program. And there is a target set by the province that for employment for 2041, 970,000 jobs. And we're looking at the existing employment at 705,000. And we are working with local municipalities to look at where we can plan to accommodate those additional jobs and the strategies that we require in order to deliver on them. And in fact, the region has been a little behind in terms of achieving those employment targets, as are most municipalities across the province, with the exception of the City of Toronto. And that's a large part of the a large part of that is the attraction in office jobs to downtown Toronto, and we're working to deliver strategies that will help achieve
We have
that.
almost one job per 2 people in Mississauga now. Take a look at it. So I think we're meeting or exceeding those targets.
City of Mississauga and Caledon are pretty close to achieving the targets. City of Brampton has been a little behind in terms of the targets, and that's partly in terms of bringing on the land supply and other factors. Yeah.
The CAO on that point, Madam Mayor, you still have the floor. CAO.
Thank you. It's a really important question that the mayor has asked, and Steve Van Offingen will be doing a presentation next on the very issue of the changing nature of employment and its impact on land use. From my perspective, I'm not sure, and you may agree once you hear from Steve, that the targets set by the province are accurate, are realistic, given the changing nature of employment in Peel. So we'll maybe follow this in the next presentation. But basically, the province appears to simply take the population number and then come up with a 50% number of that, which becomes the employment number. And what you'll see in Steve's presentation to follow is it's a far more complex issue than that.
Okay.
Madam
Mayor. Yeah. So my question is, do we have an ask of the province? Will we be writing them a letter and asking them to revise these targets? What is the ask here?
We have indicated through consultations, and so have many of the other municipalities that have participated, that from the employment standpoint, those numbers seem to be incorrect or not achievable in some municipalities. So we've asked them to reconsider them in the next time horizon.
So we've asked the province to change them. Would it help if there was a letter from us here to support that position if necessary? I mean, from my perspective, I think we're meeting them, but from the regions, perhaps not.
I think it always helps to have a letter endorsed by council in helping influence the direction that the province takes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mayor Thompson.
Thank you. To follow up on the employment forecasts, do we have any data where people are working from home or people with mobile offices? Because I know it's not, there's a lot of change with technology and everything that's happening. I know even with the new development we have is, I bet you half the people, or most, I bet you the spouses, there's at least one person working from home in a lot of homes, a lot of streets.
Mayor Thompson, I think we're going to hear more on that on the very next presentation. Why don't I believe so. That's exactly what we'll be speaking to.
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's what I was just going to suggest.
So why don't I'm going to hold your question and you'll ask it once.
All right, so I got another question here yet. Your population, you have for Mayfield West 43. We've been running data depending on which part of the development is anywhere from 65 to 67. The numbers don't add up. Why?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, this is the existing situation in the area kind of east of Kennedy Road.
Correct.
Where we've taken the actual census data, and that area is still under development. So we've shown you what's there on the ground today, not the actual planned ultimate.
So you don't have the towns there. Oh, so this is just east of.
This is just east of Kennedy Road, because we tried to choose an area that's already somewhat established and a fairly complete neighborhood.
and that's an area that's under development. What you'll see when we bring forward in the future are kind of 2041 growth allocations and that kind of work, the planned densities, and there's no question that the planned densities for the new communities in Caledon are in that sort of high 60, 70 people and jobs per hectare, yes.
Yeah, no, but I mean, this, for some reason, this data just doesn't add up. So this is why I'm wondering what's going on, because all our council reports are coming in telling us what we're doing, how we have to change our streetscapes and parking and everything else that we're having to deal with. And this is the reason why we're needing to bring transit is because the density targets, and I'm looking at here, heck, we're 25 people per hectare lower here on this data than what you're showing. So thank you for the clarification on that.
Thank you. Councillor Daskal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask, from a planning point of view, because I get this all the time down in my ward, Ward 1 Mississauga, is how much really is the city being listened to versus, in terms of say, versus the region itself? You know, as we're looking to plan, we're always looking at gentle intensification, and I love the term gentle intensification because it really has a wide range. And I'm just wondering, in terms of consideration, how is that thought of from a regional point of view?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, at the regional level, we're looking at the broad distribution of growth, planning for growth, and working very closely with the municipalities to understand the planning, the detailed planning that's going on the ground to inform our work. But at the end of the day, in terms of dictating the specifics of the form and distribution and the community planning, that's really done at the local level.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Innes.
Thank you. With regards to your presentation in the built-up area developments, so you have Caledon East listed as 18 people and jobs per hectare, but I think it kind of gives a skewed representation of what actually is happening in that community. And I'm just going to use that one because it's the ward I represent and I'm most familiar with. So you have an older area, and then you actually, it's almost like greenfield development. They are farmers' fields that are being developed. They're in the settlement boundary, but they're not actually in the heart and completely surrounded by development. And if you actually took that development as people and jobs per hectare, it would be a far higher substantial number. I know the one, for example, across from Town Hall is around 63 people per hectare. And so that's giving them a misconception, not only to my colleagues around this table, about Caledon's development and type of a development and how they're dealing with intensification and meeting the density targets. It also gives confusion to my residents who are reading this, who say, well, wait a minute, the new development that's coming into Caledon East is extremely dense. It's just as dense as what's happening in Brampton and Mississauga. So I'm wondering if there could be, when we present statistics like this in the future, if that could be a little bit clearer, and perhaps maybe not looking at villages as a whole, but looking at new development, because when you take that village as a whole, the density targets that were agreed to the development prior to the ones that we see now happening today, they were met. And Caledon East is actually one of those examples who, when they designed their secondary plan, they had density targets far reaching any density targets throughout the entire region of Peel. In fact, I would argue that they probably had density targets far surpassing most of the rest of the GTA outside of the city of Toronto. And they did that at the expense of not eating up farmers' land. And that was the purpose of it and why they had set those targets 25, 30 years ago. So I'm just hoping that in the future, when you present some of these statistics, that if there's a way that we could present it so that actually shows what's actually happening to meet the 2031 and 2041 targets today, because I don't think that that's a clear depiction of what's actually happening in our villages and communities. And I'll also say, when you talked about intensification, Caledon East doesn't have intensification. So using it as an example is really not relevant. The fact that there's the odd home that you can demolish and put two houses on is not really intensification, because you can't do much more in those areas because of the Oak Ridges Moraine. That legislation does not permit anything further. It doesn't allow for intensification on those sites. So using as an example, I think is also a misconception to my colleagues and to the public. So I would ask that we look at that. Bolton, I understand, we have intensification targets. I think to 2031 it was 10,000, and we haven't gotten there. We've only used 2,000 to 3,000 for those targets. So just moving forward in the future, I think that we need to be a little bit more clear, because that does give confusion. And when my colleagues make comments about density targets not being achieved in certain areas, that's not an accurate reflection of what is actually happening on the ground.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll take that advisement.
Thank you. If there's no other speakers, the only point that I would add, and it came up in the questioning, is when you talk about density units per acre, hectare, a lot of people get lost. And I can understand. I remember when I had to learn it for the first time. The thought that I would leave you with, and I always left my constituents with whenever talking about density, was this. It's something I learned more than 20 years ago attending a conference on behalf of the International Making Cities Livable Group in San Francisco, where two professors did an analysis of density around the world. So the two of them came up and said, we want to talk about density, which is the concept we were discussing. And they said, we've done an analysis. What's the densest city in the world? And at that time, it was Tokyo, which I get. And they said, what's the least dense city in the world? And at that time, it was Houston, Texas. I've never been, but I'm told they built it like dropping water out of a jug. It just went everywhere at 2 stories. A smarter person in the room said, what's average? And the professor said, we knew someone would ask, so we didn't go for average, because that can be, we went for the mean. So how many cities are more and less? The mean average city in the world for density 20 years ago was Toronto, Canada. Everybody flinches. Because if you'd have said it to Toronto then or today, they'd say, we're average. Are you kidding? One more dog moves in, we'll all die. We can't have more people here. You're average. Where does that leave Peel? 600,000 more people are coming. Where do you think they're going to go? Because we're so far below average. And the other thought that I would have is, and I want to give them credit, I don't know the gentleman's name, the new planning commissioner for Toronto. He was quoted in Toronto Life 2 months ago where he said, I wish I'd have said it, when you move into urban centers, by definition, you agree to be very generous with space and other people. We have far too many people that move in and then say, put up the NIMBY and the banana sign. Well, you should have bought yourself a private island instead, because we have to commune with each other in cities, and cities are going to keep growing, and it has to be seen as a positive, and we have to reward density. So that's the analysis that I give people. Relative to the world, we're in pretty good shape, and we're blessed with so many more resources, and we're going to have to share those resources and build marvelous cities and places. So marvelous analysis, and I'm glad it comes forward. Much, much more work to be done on all of the above. I will ask for a receipt of the delegation. It's been moved by Councillor McFadden and Councillor Medeiros. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. And next up, item 8.2, the changing nature of employment and implications for fiscal health and municipal sustainability. A presentation by Stephen Van Opweken, Commissioner of Finance and Chief Financial Officer, and Sunil Johal, Policy Director from the Mowat Centre. Welcome, gentlemen.
Start over again. Good morning, Chair and members of Council. I was going to introduce Sunil Johal from the Mowat Centre, but our Chair has already done that for us, so thank you very much. Today, we're going to share with you the results of the Peel Socioeconomic Study, which took a look at how the changing nature of employment impacts municipal fiscal sustainability. First, I will provide a little bit of context on why we undertook the study. Peel continues to be one of Canada's fastest growing municipalities. Our population is forecast to grow by the size of the city of Hamilton, reaching close to 2 million by 2041. Over that time, the province has forecast an additional 250,000 jobs coming to Peel. To support this growth, Peel will make significant infrastructure investments estimated at approximately $9 billion. As you know, municipalities are creatures of the province, and outside of Toronto, revenue sources are limited. Peel's primary sources of revenue are property taxes and development charges, which are in effect taxes and fees on land use. With limited revenue sources, Peel is highly vulnerable to changes in land use. I will now provide a little bit more detail on how these two revenue sources are performing in Peel. Starting with development charges, as shown on this slide. We collect development charges to fund infrastructure such as water, wastewater, and roads to support population and employment growth forecasted by the province. Between 2002 and 2017, Peel's non-residential development charge revenues have fallen short of forecasts by over $830 million. At the same time, Peel's debt financed growth-related infrastructure to the tune of $1.4 billion. As a result of this growing debt burden, Council instituted a growth management program, and to date, that program has reduced our forecasted debt burden by over $700 million. Non-residential property taxes are a critical source of municipal revenue to fund municipal services and to maintain our extensive infrastructure requirements. As noted on the previous slide, if new employment-related facilities are not being developed, then it should follow that the property tax revenue derived from non-residential properties would also struggle. As shown on this slide, Peel's proportion of non-residential property tax revenue has declined from 44% in 2002 to 36% in 2018, shifting the municipal funding burden to the residential sector. Visually, this chart quickly illustrates the impact of the changing nature of employment since 2004. This change is dramatic and required a more in-depth assessment to understand what was taking place. Based on the revenue and land consumption trends, we began to formulate a theory. I watch Caribbean life, as many of you may do as well, and see many people moving and working from the islands. With technology, it is now possible for many jobs to work from anywhere. With Skype, I could even deliver this presentation from Mexico. Since the 1990s, globalization has resulted in labor-intensive industries moving to Mexico, China, and other low-cost jurisdictions. Over the past decade, we are witnessing a digital revolution. For example, I have 2 daughters. On a regular basis, there are packages waiting at my front door when I come home from work. Who needs shopping malls? Increasingly, everybody is point-click shopping. Digital transformation includes Uber, Airbnb, online banking, AI, robotics, just to name a few. All of these changes are affecting how land is being consumed, or so that was our theory. So why did we engage the Mowat Center? The evidence suggested there are transformative changes in the nature of employment taking place. Municipal non-residential revenues are not keeping pace with our growth. We are seeing an increased risk of stranded debt and rising residential tax burdens. Although Peel is one of 8 AAA municipalities today, my question, will we be sustainable by 2041? I will now turn it over to Sunil to present the Mowat's findings.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Great to be here. Although if I'd known I could have presented from Mexico, I might have taken up that offer. So it was really a pleasure to work on this report with the region. The entire report's at the back of your agenda. I'm just going to highlight some of the top-level findings of what we looked into. So, I mean, as Stephen's already mentioned, I mean, municipalities in Canada operate in a unique context. Their revenue tools are limited, to say the least. Only 9 cents of every household tax dollar in Ontario flows to municipalities, a figure that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And the challenge looking forward over the next 15, 20 years for municipalities is that many of their expenditure responsibilities will likely grow significantly, while revenue growth will not likely keep pace unless new opportunities or new tools are considered. So, I mean, in terms of the new economy, Stephen hinted at some of these issues already, but in Peel, for example, I mean, we're looking at demographic changes that will be very significant. 1 in 10 Peel residents was a senior citizen in 2011. That figure will jump to 1 in 4 by 2041. Inequality and wage stagnation are significant issues, not just in Peel, but across Canada and other advanced economies. Wage growth is barely keeping up with inflation in Peel across Ontario and in Canada for many workers. Non-standard and precarious work is increasingly becoming the norm. So more people are engaged in part-time, temporary forms of employment. Fewer and fewer people have full-time jobs that that come with benefits and pensions. Across Ontario, that figure is probably around 30 to 32% of workers engaged in vulnerable, precarious forms of work. 60% of employment growth in advanced economies since the mid-1990s has been in non-standard forms of work. And if we look at the numbers in Peel, part-time, self-employment, and temporary forms of work all outstrip average employment rates, whereas full-time growth is below that average growth rate. And then the big issue that's a significant topic of conversation in the media is what will technological change mean to all of these ongoing trends? So I'm sure you've all heard about artificial intelligence, automation. Are the robots coming to take our jobs? I mean, nobody really knows the answer to that question, but various projections range from potentially 5 or 8% of existing jobs in Canada all the way up to 42% of existing jobs being eliminated over the next 20 years as a result of technological change. If we look at Peel, some of the most significant employers in the region, so transportation, manufacturing, et cetera, are more prone to automation than some of the other occupations that don't employ as many people in the region. So what we did was we essentially looked at 3 plausible scenarios going forward towards 2040 for Peel, and we assessed across a variety of different variables what might happen in a best case, kind of steady as we go scenario, or in a worst case scenario for the region, with a focus on the implications for property tax burden on households. So in a business as usual state, so if we assume that employment, wages, expenditures by the region stay basically consistent with historical growth patterns, by 2040 there'll be a 1% increase as a portion of household income in property tax. So that's essentially a 25% jump in property tax as a proportion of household income for the average household in Peel. That doesn't sound like a lot, going from 4 to 5%, but I mean, every dollar counts for people in today's day and age. If we look at the worst case scenario, so if we start to see some of those job losses as a result of technological change take hold, if incomes start declining across the region, if commercial tax revenues start falling as well, we could see a doubling of that property tax rate as a proportion of household income, so 8% rather than the 4% it stands at today. And that would certainly be noticed by citizens and be a significant source of challenge. Then in the best case scenario, so if the region were able to diversify its revenue sources, precarious work starts declining actually, and we start seeing better quality jobs penetrate the region's labor market. There's significant support of workers transitioning to the new economy. And importantly, other revenue tools are put on the table by 2040. So I mean, in this case, we just put on the table a municipal income tax of 1%. There's obviously many other possibilities for revenue tools. You could actually see the property tax decline as a portion of household income from 4% to 3%. So that's a wide range of possibilities. We don't know, obviously, which one will happen. This was really done to help test planning and test policy options. And there are a significant array of policy options on the table for Peel and for many other municipalities across the province and across Canada. So I mean, I won't go through all of these in any level of detail. They're outlined in the report in much more granular detail, but looking at some of the options that the City of Toronto has, for example, on the table, municipal income taxes, sales taxes, cutting unnecessary red tape, service delivery improvements, looking at progressive property taxes. As property tax values increase, should there be higher property tax rates on property, for example? So I mean, happy to take questions on any of these at the end. But I mean, I think the ultimate takeaway here is, and this doesn't just really apply to municipalities, this is a situation that is relevant for provinces and federal government as well. Historically, particularly at senior levels of government, we've looked at tax as something that's residence-based, so domicile-based. So where you live determines what you pay in taxes and who you pay your taxes to. In a digital economy, where you are is increasingly becoming less relevant. And that is a huge challenge for senior levels of government in terms of taxing economic activity and value that's being created in jurisdictions outside of Canada, but that are significantly affecting, for example, the retail sector in Canada. So Amazon closing down many stores in Canada, but not taxable and outside the reach of Canadian taxation authorities. For municipalities, this situation is particularly accentuated because we're not just talking about where people live, where firms are located. We're talking about land specifically, property taxes based on land, development charges based on land. I mean, so as the nature of work changes, as we see more mobile workers, as we see telework, increase shift to online e-commerce activities, et cetera, these revenue strains, which the region is already facing, are only likely to get worse over time, absent some kind of specific response.
Thank you, Sunil. Your work certainly has confirmed for us that the changing nature of employment is placing municipal fiscal sustainability at risk over the long term. The residential property tax burden will continue to increase and eventually could become unaffordable. To mitigate these risks, municipalities require a fair share of economic growth and prosperity. Unfortunately, senior levels of government are also struggling to bring their own fiscal health in order. This is why all provincial parties came out against the AMO 1% solution. I believe we need to have a long-term plan to educate senior levels of government on the risks all municipalities face. Senior governments rely on municipalities to deliver critical services. They cannot afford to see municipalities fail. We recommend engaging AMO and FCM to begin this dialogue and use the Government Relations Committee to develop a long-term education and advocacy strategy. Thank you. This concludes our presentation.
And an excellent presentation it was that's prompted quite a list. Mayor Crombie.
So certainly I do want to get a little more granular on the whole revenue stream. Certainly AMO and Marco couldn't agree on a tool that we could all lobby behind, advocate for, and hence that 1% campaign didn't go forward. So from your perspective, Sunil, what are the possibilities of revenue tools? We see Toronto has vehicle registration tax, land transfer tax, and you talk about progressive property taxes that they're discussing, but yet they don't raise property taxes even to the rate of inflation in the way we do here in Peel. Certainly not in Mississauga. We're very fiscally responsible, but we do take a responsible approach. So cutting red tape, how far does that go? Cutting services, yes, that'll be a reality in the future if this isn't addressed. Sales taxes, and what about income taxes? Do we lobby the federal government to change all that up? So I think it's a discussion worth having. I'm sure many of our councillors would like to hear your thoughts. What's appropriate for us?
Sure, and I mean, obviously it's a huge question, but I mean, I think the challenge right now for municipalities is their direct line of accountability and relationship is with the province, or with the provinces across the country. However, if we look at revenue responsibilities and who has what going forward, it's going to be the federal government who's actually going to have the most fiscal space over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Provinces are going to be in much the same boat as municipalities. So having a conversation with them about, well, can we kind of divide up our pie a little bit more fairly is probably not going to go very far, because provinces are going to say, look, we're in the same boat you're at. We're trying to cut services or modernize services to save funding. It's the federal government. I mean, the parliamentary budget officer is estimating, I think they'll have about $29 billion annually in about 15 or 20 years to either spend or cut taxes with. So I think figuring out a way to get to the feds and think about what can they do. I mean, I think the gas tax funding in the budget last week was it's a good start, but if there are ways of kind of institutionalizing that federal flow of dollars, either direct to municipalities or to provinces that are earmarked for municipalities, is probably the kind of strategically the big picture best bet. And then, obviously, tactically, there are many, kind of as you mentioned, as we talk about in the report, there are many tactical choices around sales tax. Should municipalities get a
big share of the cannabis taxes that'll be coming into provincial coffers over the coming years. I mean, all kind of options there. And I mean, I think we probably don't have enough time to kind of analyze the pros and cons of all of them, but happy to kind of chat offline about that with anyone who's interested.
I'm sure we're all interested, and I'm not as convinced as you are that there's going to be a huge windfall off cannabis revenue taxes.
Oh, it won't.
No.
It wouldn't be huge. It would be, this is like at the margins we're talking, yeah.
Because we have a deal right now where we get 50% after 100 million, and I don't think we're going to get very much. So, you know, this is something that we have to come to terms with, and it'll be a great discussion. You got a long list, so I'll get off the board. I'm sure other people have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Snail, over here. And Stephen for their presentation. I almost feel like we're getting to be at a tipping point, not just us, but municipalities in general. What's worrisome is moving forward with our seniors population becoming potentially 1/4 of our population. And the fact that they're going to be on a fixed income, it's at the point where it's just increasingly becoming unaffordable. So not only are people going to be moving out, but there may be a lot of other economic spirals that come out of that. So that is a little bit worrisome. I know that the mayor briefly touched on potentially looking at a share of the income tax. I think it really comes down to municipalities having to renegotiate their role within the federal and provincial jurisdictions. We're responsible for those day-to-day operations of everyday lives, and we're just not getting that same input, and we can't make those reinvestments and keep taxes at a manageable level. Have you looked at a variable model where potentially there could be an income tax that comes back to the municipalities and a flat property tax? Have you looked at a variation on those types of models? So there's, so you would incorporate both?
So I mean, what we did was we developed a model for Stephen's team and for the region, which has a number of different variables attached to it. So I mean, the numbers can kind of be moved up and down. So if we did X on this piece, what would happen here and what would happen here. So I think the model as it currently stands would accommodate thinking about, okay, if we added a new revenue tool here, what would that mean for property taxes in the long run? If we reduced expenditures by the region by 1/4, what would that mean? So I mean, I can't give you the exact numbers off the top of my head, but the model we developed gives the flexibility to staff to at least start thinking about those different options. I mean, not that staff weren't thinking about that before our report was completed, but I think increasingly it's going to be a mixed bag of approaches. I mean, there is no silver bullet to address these issues. It's going to be a combination of service efficiencies, reduction of expenses, lobbying senior orders of government for new opportunities, maximizing approaches that are currently taken by the region. So how do we optimize what we're already getting out of property taxes? Is there a case for a mobile worker class of property tax? So shared office spaces maybe should be taxed at a different level than residential property tax. I think kind of all of these things should be looked at and considered. Our report, I think, is...
Although something like that goes down a little bit of a slippery slope, because when people typically work from home, there are other benefits, less use on our infrastructure, and certainly there's a benefit on the climate change side. So there are certain behaviors that you want to encourage, and working from home is one of them. So I think we have to be very careful when we go down that road.
Sure, it's just whether... should there be kind of something that's incrementally a little bit higher than a residential property tax if you're working at home, but still lower than a commercial tax? Like, you wouldn't be taxing somebody as if they were going to an office space. So I don't know, Stephen, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in.
Thank you. I think there is a wide range of evidence out there, or in terms of other practices experienced in other jurisdictions. Ontario probably has the most restrictive municipal revenue sources that the research shows. But if you were to go, even if you go to Quebec or to Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they're looking at sharing HST revenues in those provinces. So they've started moving that ball forward. Ontario is probably the furthest behind in Canada. But if you look at other municipal jurisdictions around the world, they have a wide range of different kinds of tools that are available to them that in our environment in Ontario that we simply don't have. So all of those would have to be explored, but at the end of the day, if the senior levels of government don't understand how critical the issue is, there's no conversation to have.
Okay, thank you. And I think referring this back to the Government Relations Committee is the right plan, so we can perhaps flesh out a direction to approach the different levels of government on. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So a quick question in terms of the slide about the changing nature of employment. In terms of that analysis, is that just an analysis of the changing nature of employment for the private sector?
So most of those trends are particular to the private sector as opposed to public sector employment. So if you look at things like unionization rates, for example, they've held relatively steady in the public sector in Canada over the past 30 years or so. But they've been on a fairly steady state of decline in the private sector. But private sector employment is certainly a much larger share of employment than public sector employment across the country. So the fact that the public sector has been relatively immune or kind of separate from these trends doesn't take away from the fact that for many people, this is what's happening to them. But I mean, I think even in the public sector, you're starting to see more of a transition towards people starting on contracts and temporary roles, whereas 20, 30 years ago, you would generally be hired into a full-time position relatively early
I
on.
asked the question because as we're trying to find revenue, other sources and means of revenue given this disruption and disruptive technology impacting the workforce, we're also, as a region, as municipalities, as a city, on the expense side of things, getting the pressure to find efficiencies. And one of the ways to find efficiencies is using technology to streamline our services. And what that means is that we too become victims of letting go of people because of disruptive technology. So what we're seeing is this vicious cycle, and I'm not sure, I mean, I think it's something that we should keep our eye on because it's not reflective in this particular report, but what is the impact of disruptive technologies at the municipal level or any level of government when we have to lay off workers to find efficiencies and introduce technology to streamline our processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I was just in Ottawa last couple of days, and we had a delegation from Denmark talking about their move to digitization of services, and they're a world leader on this front. So they do almost everything online now. 90% of Danes, when you comes time to file your taxes, it's all pre-populated. You just look it over, send it back. They actually had to slow down their divorce e-filing for divorce because people would have a fight on Saturday. It would be automatically your divorce. They said, we need to put a 10-day hold into this so people aren't making a rash decision because the system is too fast. But I mean, all to say, they actually they've moved everything in terms of post online, and one of the unforeseen impacts of that was the Danish post office almost went bankrupt. So it does hit the public sector for sure when you digitize services. The question becomes, can we move some of those workers to other roles that are maybe more customer focused and require more discretion and aren't as transactional in nature? Because generally speaking, you're talking about kind of people answering phones, answering the same kinds of question every day who are going to be automated out of work, but you're still going to need frontline service workers helping people navigate systems. So I think a lot of this is transition planning, not so much necessarily job loss. It'll be changing jobs in the public sector rather than necessarily significant amounts of jobs being lost.
For sure. And so I think that we have to be careful and keep our eye on that and making sure that we have those transitional programs in place at all levels of government, the region and the city in particular in this case, just because when those folks lose their job because of technological disruption within our role as employers. Sometimes they lose the job, they no longer have income, they have to sell their home, property taxes don't get paid, et cetera, et cetera. It's a vicious cycle. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair.
Thank you. I guess a question I have is regarding sales tax access. I think about 30 years ago, I saw a presentation about some town in the United States, and I guess within that state, they were allowed to institute sales tax in their town, and they were faced with a Walmart coming in, of course, sucking the commerce out of the Main Street area. And they said, okay, we're going to accept the Walmart, but we're going to put in a small sales tax and take that revenue and rejuvenate our downtown core with it. And I always thought that that was the basic argument, that we need access to sales taxes. What is the possibility in your mind of breaking through and getting a percentage at least?
If I knew the answer to that question, I'd probably be in a different role. I don't know the answer to that in terms of kind of political feasibility. The bigger question is, we haven't had a fundamental review of the tax system in Canada in 50 years. So in terms of roles and responsibilities amongst levels of government, I think all levels of government would benefit from that conversation, and the much more prominent role of municipalities in the past, in that 50-year period, I think merits access to sales tax or other revenue sources that that are on the table. But that's a very political question that I probably can't give you a strong answer on.
Good. It's a political forum. Thank you.
Well said. Councillor Parrish.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be careful because I may offend persons shortly, but first I'll start off by congratulating Mayor Brown for his zero tax increase yesterday. I don't want you to take offense at the following remarks. And all of council, yes, I'm sorry. I always have you here to remind me. I think one of our problems in our country is we are obsessed as politicians promising zero tax increases or no tax increases. And it's the sophistication of the whole North America. We all do it, so I put that aside. I think it's a mistake. I think taxes are here to level things out and provide services for people. And if you look at the highest taxed countries in the world, they have the lowest rates of crime, they have the best educated population and the healthiest. Sweden being an example, Belgium, the Netherlands, Finland. So our obsession, which we egg each other on to do all the time, is zero tax increase or minimal tax increase. So I think that's a serious problem. The second thing is I think that 1% campaign failed because we were asking them to add 1% to the sales tax. Had we said, give us 1% of the sales tax as it sits now, and then we're not going to ask you for all the grants that we're begging for all the time, I think it would have been a better campaign. You're nodding your head, so I'm going to keep going. I think the idea of one income tax. I brought it up when I was an MP in 1993, and everybody clutched their pearls like we were insane. It's never taken off at the senior levels of government, and an institute like the Mowat Center should be building a case for income tax-based, taking property tax right off the program. We could set our budgets as we do now. We would let the province know what our budget is. The province, as they do, lets the feds know what it is. The feds make the tax bill, and then they divvy it all out. And no one's ever taken that on and worked it through and figured out exactly how that would work and how it would turn out. So I'm challenging you to take that back to the Mowat Institute or Mowat Center and see if you guys could come up with something. Because what's really unfair is you have two identical houses on one street. One house, you've got 4 wage earners, mom, dad, professionals, one kid's a doctor, one kid's a lawyer, not married yet. And they're paying the same amount of tax as an old couple across the road on a pension. And the old couple across the road's using less water, less everything. So the system sucks. It's completely unfair. And as long as we keep perpetuating it, and we keep saying we're going to try to do this with zero tax increase, you vote for me and I'm not going to raise your taxes. Patrick's not yelling at me yet, so I'm probably still okay. But I think that's the problem. It's a regressive type of tax, and it should be all based on what you're earning. And then it should be divided evenly, and then we should stop talking about zero tax increases at the property level. We should have no taxes at the property level, just water taxes or water fees for services. You're nodding. Would you like to try this for me?
Sure.
And come back in a year?
We could look at that. I mean, a lot of really great points. I mean, I think on the first point, that's critical. I mean, the climate of we can't raise taxes is pervasive here, but we are, relatively speaking, a low tax jurisdiction compared to other OECD countries. The challenge is because we neighbor the United States, there's a significant competitive pressure to maintain tax rates at a relatively low level because they have very low levels of taxation. Also, so while Denmark, Sweden, and so on have much higher rates of taxation, much more expansive public services, very generous public services, we're kind of constrained by the fact that our competitor to the south holds us back in terms of what we can do, because there's a significant fear, and I think probably rightfully from governments, that if we significantly raise taxes, a lot of businesses would flee to the States. So I think that it's a great point and something that we have to think about as a country.
Okay, and I know Sweden's level is at 57%. No one goes below that. But they also don't pay for health care. They don't pay for half the things we pay for here, drugs. They have no crime. They have no guns. So I don't know. We should have a look at it.
Thank you. Councillor Fonseca.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. From both of you, I do agree it should go to the Government Relations Committee. Just as the FCM representative for Peel, I just wanted to make a few comments. So over the past year, FCM has advocated for a number of things. One, to the federal government, and had quite successful meetings with many MPs, ministers, from right across a number of different ministries. One thing that was advocated for was a new intergovernmental forum to ensure that the municipalities are right there. And this was Big City Mayors also advocated for this. Having this intergovernmental forum changes kind of the structure of when the decisions are being made. The municipalities will be there as recognized as an order of government that needs to be at the table, because we right across the country are accountable to whatever it is, 77% of the infrastructure and maintaining that, but also building new infrastructure as well. So advocating for that new intergovernmental forum is extremely important. Also, making sure that the gas tax and a confirmation from the federal government that that's permanent. It's obviously and indexed. It's obviously a very successful program and brings a great deal of sustainable funding through to the municipalities. So the ask was, could that be expanded to a greater extent? Another was some sort of a permanent fund through taxation or somehow a formula for disaster mitigation adaptation funding. Another was detailing a permanent federal fund or an ask similar to the gas tax, but specifically around modernizing transit. And that tied also into a national transportation strategy. So that is something that FCM has been advocating for, and also through Big City Mayors over the past number of years, but in the past year leading up to the federal budget, FCM was quite happy with the announcement in the federal budget around the doubling down of the gas tax. Also, a significant investment in the FCM Green Municipal Fund, and funding that went into directly for municipalities for the disaster mitigation funding. So why FCM was so happy is because this money flows directly to the municipalities, which is something that is quite a bit of red tape when it has to flow through so many orders of government. My question to you would be, what are your thoughts on a similar fund to, because this is something that I can also bring back to FCM in terms of advocacy for Peel Region and the local municipalities. FCM continues to press for, and it's supported by right across the FCM board for a permanent, some sort of permanent federal funding mechanism similar to the gas tax, but specific to modernization of transit and transportation systems and a national transportation strategy.
Sure, thanks for the question. As I said at the outset, I mean, I think that's the best way to go for municipalities at this point, given that the federal government over the coming years is going to have much more leeway to spend than the provinces. So looking to the federal government for kind of consistent, long-term, dependable funding sources is a good idea. And whether that's dedicated to transit or for environmental initiatives or housing, I mean, I think across the board there's a lot of places where jurisdictionally there's overlap between what the federal government and municipalities are delivering. So if the municipalities can push for consistent funding in those areas, that would be probably strategically a better move than focusing on the province, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. And one other question, just with regards to, so FCM, because there's so many variations across the country with municipalities, what FCM has found successful, and also through big city mayors, and where they've had a good response from the federal government, is when you have a program like the gas tax, and then the money flows through the municipalities with less restrictions on those funds. That is something that is the federal government has been very open to looking at. And it looks to be successful for municipalities because obviously right across the country, there's many differences in terms of how municipalities, larger, smaller, rural, remote, are able to access the funding. So it seems like those types of, that type of a program and that type of a formula, and having that be sustainable or permanent is very beneficial to the municipalities, but also beneficial to the federal government. So what I would ask is that as the FCM rep for this, going back to the Government Relations Committee, that whatever, if they could think about in terms of the ask to the federal government, we've had a good response from the federal government to date on that type of a mechanism. If they could consider those when they're looking at funds that would potentially or could potentially, when there's a discussion at the Government Relations Committee on this, that they look in terms of the framework of how beneficial that gas tax funding has been to the municipalities, and also in the form of looking at now having a national housing strategy in place and a potentially a national transportation strategy. Do we think that that would benefit Peel and the local municipalities as well? And it would be good to get feedback on that from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Thompson.
Yes, it's interesting. They say up to 42% is existing jobs, but as they say, as people are getting older and retiring, when you listen to the automation is not moving quick enough to sustain ourselves with people retiring to have we can't even get people to operate and work now. Go everywhere. There's jobs. There's need for jobs. So it's an interesting seeing the technology on how things are changing, but we're not adapting. So I smile when I see this, but when you hear from the automation, they're being told they're not moving quick enough to make themselves sustainable as we all get older and we're going to be retired. Which leads to the next question is in Ontario, we're paying the highest property taxes today of any other province in Canada, which is a challenge which is not going to be sustainable if we're looking at this figure. My question is people working from home now, if you're working from home, you can write this off in income tax and you can write that off in income tax. So as much as I guess one of the questions I have is, through the census, can we have questions added to the census form to know how many people in municipalities are working from home on a percentage level to understand, you know, is it 1 in 4? Is it 1 in 2? We don't know. We don't know what it is. Maybe it's 1 in 9. We don't know. But I think it's something we need to figure out to really know how to build as we go forward. And there's two things. As Chris was just talking about, it's the same what I see at AMO. And I know what Councillor Parrish was saying is the 1%. I do agree with you. And the rural municipalities of Ontario is asking, give us 1 cent of the HST. Just as you heard the regional chair on the social housing aspect that we get, look what we can do on 8-9 cents the dollar. You give us 1 cent, I can tell you we'll give you a bigger bang from the buck than the government can deliver on infrastructure. Give it to the municipalities, you watch us deliver on it. And we'll create a lot of work into the process. So I think that's how we have to sell it. But where I'm coming back from is we almost needed to have an understanding similar to what the United States did back in the 50s. Municipalities, you tax for this, nothing more. State, you do this, and federal government, you're responsible. That's why municipalities in the states do not pay for transit. It's not their problem, not their worry. Problem is, we're doing everything. We're, you know, with the federal government, provincial government, oh, we want to cut, we'll just download it to the municipality, so we're picking it on the property tax. There's a lot of things we're paying on the property tax we shouldn't be paying. And I think what we really need to do is reset the clock. Disruptive innovations happening in the workplace. People are working from home, you're giving tax deductions. That's great. I know I benefit from it the way my wife does. But the reality is we have to start thinking differently, and I think we almost need to sit down as municipalities, as province, and as federal government across Canada, through FCM as well as AMO, to start to say who does what and who's responsible for everything, because to keep moving the deck chairs is not sustainable for anybody, and we have to think how we go forward. And maybe resetting the watch, I think it was 1952, it was under Eisenhower that did that. I'm not so sure maybe we need to get there ourselves, or we're all going to be in big trouble by 2051 because we're not going to be sustainable of any government. And we got to remember what is our role and what do we deliver for. And I think that's where we need to get back to. But I guess my question is, to do that, we need good data. And can we ask that when because we're coming up for the next round of census, do we have the ability, or do you have the ability in what the work you do, that we can ask questions, or how do we go about that process, or as municipally, is that something we should ask?
Yeah, great question, Mayor. So you're 100% right. I mean, that was one of the challenges of doing this study and a lot of the other work we do in this space is we don't have very granular data in terms of how many mobile workers are there, how many people in the gig economy are there. I mean, Stats kind of started to look at the gig economy piece in the past year or two, but that's certainly something I think the region, I would encourage you to kind of reach out to StatsCan and say this is something we would want. And I think through a venue like FCM or AMO, that obviously has more weight as well. But we don't have that level of data in Canada in terms of some of, especially when it comes to some of these emerging job types, because we don't update the census questions that frequently. So, Stephen?
We certainly have, thank you, we certainly have a process through our Peel Data Center where, and our economists, where we're in constant regular dialogue with Census Stats Canada in terms of the type of information being provided. So it's certainly something that we can take back to make sure we're getting the right kinds of questions asked.
So here's my second question.
We can ask. We don't necessarily have all the influence.
So I'm going to let's get constructive here. I'm just wondering, Steve, if you can come back with a report later on what questions we need to ask. You got Chris, you got myself, and we've got several others sitting on large city mayors as well. We all deliver the same message off the same song sheet. And if you have good factual data, and that's exactly what we have here at Peel, maybe what we need to do is turn that up. I know we're talking about advocacy that we're doing, but I think from all angles that we need to push, that we need to have these questions asked for the next round of census so that we all have good data to work with. Because, you know, it's great when we have great ideas, but until we get good hard data on who does what. And out of the Peel data we also have, and I'm changing gears here again, is how much are we actually paying that we shouldn't be paying for as a regional government for that is covering the freight for the federal government and for the provincial government? It'd be really nice to know what those percentages are, so that we could start to push back and say, that's your responsibility, not ours, but somehow we got to figure out a way to have sustainable taxes in the future.
The CAO has a thought on that, David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We engaged Sunil and Mowat on this because, as Sunil has said so well, in a digital economy, today, where you live and work is no longer relevant as a determinant of how much tax you pay. So seeking out more information about how many people work at home and we then change the property tax a little bit to try and extract some of that, I think it'll give us short-term data, but I think the really long-term look we have to take and we have to advocate for is municipalities are really critically important for the economy, more now than ever in the past. And what municipalities need, our long-term goal should be to have a stable source of income, of revenues from economic activity in the country, not from the value of land. And that's the direction, and also the discretion on how to use it. Because FCM's done lots of great work to get more pots of money allocated to municipalities, but all those pots of money come with parameters, come with strings that limit how we can spend them. And the economy and our communities are changing so rapidly that they quite quickly become out of date. And really, I think what we should be in the long term advocating for is a slice of revenue from the product of the economy, economic growth and prosperity, and the discretion to use it to meet the needs in our community. Everything else is short-term and can, to use your quote, Mr. Mayor, moving deck chairs on the Titanic. Yeah. What we need to be doing is looking at changing the course of the ship.
Absolutely.
And that's why we engaged the MOAT.
And thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Patrick, Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's some great points that have been made. First of all, I should say thank you, Councillor Parrish, for recognizing Brampton's tax freeze. It was the first in 20 years. I know Mississauga's had many, and so it was about time we did a little bit of catch-up, and great that we had everyone on council support that direction. In terms of revenue tools, I know Mayor Crombie referenced earlier income taxes or new fees that municipalities can charge, but I really agree with Councillor Parrish and Councillor Thompson when they said giving up, asking for a new tax is going to be dead on arrival. I remember I was the opposition leader at the time when LUMCO, which the mayors sit on, and AMO pushed that additional percent. And all three parties knocked it down immediately because there's no appetite for new taxes. But I think where the pitch needs to happen is for a percentage of revenue that is already collected. And so when Councillor Fonseca talks about the federal gas tax, that's an example. That is collected, and it was municipalities that advocated and got that percentage, and that's a great fund. That's a fund that grows. It's a fund that can be utilized, and obviously we're all elated with the federal budget increasing that contribution. And so if we can grow revenue sources like that, then I think there's a pitch to be made. And I think it's consistent with what Mayor Thompson was saying. The reason we can make that pitch that we deserve a portion of their fiscal or their revenue collection is because we're doing services that were not on the backs of municipalities before. So I think it'd be a great exercise, Chair, if we could collect and identify as part of our advocacy all areas of municipal responsibility that are they're not part of municipal responsibility that we're currently funding that we didn't 30 years ago. And let me give you an example. Hospitals. You want a new hospital in your community, the municipality is going to be giving a big contribution. But we were never supposed to charge for hospitals on the property tax bill. We don't charge it for it in development charges. But you want to look at the price tag on a capital contribution to a hospital? Since when is that a municipal responsibility? It isn't. Yet Yet that's something we all struggle with. And I think if we identify a list of areas like that, or a new provincial or federal program that's rolled out, it's funded for 4 years, and then as soon as the program finishes its funding, then it's expected to be continued by municipalities. And if we could identify examples like that, I think that would be helpful in our advocacy. I also wanted to suggest, as part of our work on this, looking at our revenue model, is we do a comparison to other provinces. And so I think part of our revenue model is having our fair share. And if there are responsibilities that Ontario municipalities have because they've been downloaded but other municipalities don't, that's important to know contextually. And I'd also note, I really want to dig deep at the allocations that are being made under Building Canada in other provinces. And I haven't compared the data. I know we've obviously talked about Peel's fair share, but I looked at that major announcement in Edmonton a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if you saw that. And I was green with envy. Like, that was a massive infrastructure investment, and good for the city of Edmonton. They were able to elicit that amount of funding from the federal government. But part of our advocacy is to look at those comparisons. Peel region is bigger than Edmonton, but if you look at our last significant transit investment from the federal government, if you look at that Zoom, it was $80 million in 2008. And you look at other municipalities that are of smaller size, getting $1 billion. Obviously we need to look at why we're not getting that same funding. And so, is that possible? Would be a willingness to, and how difficult would it be to build that type of data for us? Because that would help us make our pitch. Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Parrish, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Mayor Brown was saying. When I was an MP, I famously sat my last year as an independent. And I was told, it wasn't entirely non-voluntary, I was told by the speaker that I could ask one question a week. So my first question to the House, where there was dead silence, everybody stopped packing their books and sat down and wondered what I was going to ask, is why was a family of 4 getting settlement money in Ontario of $2,400 and a family of 4 getting settlement money of $5,800 in Quebec? And Joe Volpe was the minister at the time. He got up and danced a little soft shoe and couldn't answer the question. So when it was over, I went up to Peter Milliken and I said, I don't like that answer. He said, then ask it again next week. He said, you can ask it for 52 weeks if you want. Eventually they pulled it together and they made a deal with Ontario and they increased the money that came to Ontario. My next question, once that was done, why is it Quebec can go out and pull French-speaking people in from all over the world? They don't have to go through Canadian immigration. They land in Montreal. They stay there for an hour. Then they come to Peel. But the money, the $5,800, stays in Quebec for immigrant settlement. Unfortunately, the government fell, so I never did get that one fixed. But the point Mayor Brown is making is absolutely accurate. That's the sort of hidden things that we also have to check. What's happening here in Ontario as far as favoritism with Quebec, Alberta, some of the other provinces are getting way more money from the feds for the same things that we're doing here, and those need to be checked as well. I think we have to compile a massive list. I think this is a brilliant idea. And maybe we could get a couple of people to ask the questions in the House of Commons again, but there's going to be a few independents there shortly.
Thank you. Well, marvelous conversation. If you'll permit me, Sunil, I'm just going to tell you a brief story because I've been given so many segues from Carolyn, from Alan, from the CAO, and from Patrick. I attended a funeral a month ago. Grand old family and gentleman who lived in my constituency survived the war and moved into Cooksville and bought, post-war, one of those just-built 1,100 square foot little bungalows. He would go on to generate hundreds of millions of dollars of wealth. As fate would have it, he lived in my constituency in his little 1,100 square foot home that he never left. It's where he passed away. But all of his wealth was generated outside our borders. for the hundreds of millions of dollars that he generated, if not for his benefactor and his heart to hospitals and other charities, we would not have gotten and did not get a penny from him over his entire life. Now, number one, Councilor Nika, you usually know your facts. You're wrong. You got his property tax. Yes and no. Had he moved out of the house, somebody else would have bought the house. I get that tax anyway. The only way I ever would have got a penny out of him or anybody else who does not have real property and employment property in my constituency of Mississauga, Brampton, Caledon, or Peel is if they have bricks and mortar somewhere. All of his bricks and mortar were outside of Peel. I'm surprised the provincial and federal governments didn't send representatives and flowers to the funeral because they love this guy. Because I will tell you anecdotally from my days working in the financial services sector, I've said this all my life, in Canada, if you have $1, you paid $1 for it. You're doing your taxes now, half goes to, but I got $1, I'm buying a bond. Well, you had $2. You gave the provincial and a buck. You're the gift that keeps giving. And if you've got a few bucks and you buy a car, you're giving them a little bit more. And if you put et cetera, I get none of that. The equation is getting uglier because I can only tax real property, not income. The nature of employment might not need real property. Alan, the point that you keep making. So I'm a dead man walking. But let's go back to the real property. Who owns real property? Older folk, because they've been around long enough to own it and they bought it when it was cheaper. They're the ones telling us we can't afford your tax increases. They're going to be telling us that for 40, 50 years. They're living a long time. God help us all if there's a bout of inflation in Canada where they then say, you know that pension that I thought that looked pretty good in 2020? I've lived so long that the $70,000 you gave me then buys a loaf of bread today in 2080, and I'm still alive, or 2060 or 2040. So what are you going to do, city, to get me my trans help? I need dialysis 5 times a week. My kids have moved away. I still want to stay in my home. If we don't get a new deal, we are dead. And with respect to all of you, it is my blessing and curse. I've been around for 30 years, as I've told you. I know where the bodies are, and I know where I got there, how they got there. All of the arguments I'm hearing today in the province, this is all known. Is anybody going to tell me a premier or a doesn't know we need a new deal, can't keep? It's known. Sure, let's get a little bit more data, by all means. But the fundamental thing that has to change is the way Confederation works and the way we share wealth. Because we are dead in the water if we think as municipalities we can keep paying all of the bills that get downloaded to us on the real property that people increasingly can't pay their taxes on. So I agree with everything that's said. Let's do the data. The argument's been well known and it's been known for decades. Let's just stick to the fundamental argument and say we need a new deal or municipalities will start going bankrupt, just like 500 or so are in the process of doing in the United States. So great conversation. We have to keep our foot on the gas pedal and say we simply need a new deal. You want to throw in some data, go ahead. But they know it. It's self-evident. This is why I welcome the conversation, and we have to continue to press because it's the only option we have. My thanks to you, my thanks to staff, my thanks for an excellent conversation. I have a recommendation before being moved by Councillor Parrish, seconded by Mayor Brown, that the findings and the recommendations of the research report, Rethinking Municipal Finance for the New Economy, conducted by the Mowat Centre, be shared with the Association of Municipalities of Ontario and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And further, that the report of the Commissioner of Finance and Chief Financial Officer entitled, The Changing Nature of Employment and Implications for Fiscal Health and Municipal Sustainability, be referred to the Government Relations Committee to inform the development of an advocacy strategy. You've heard the motion. This is a vote. If I could ask you to vote in a recorded vote at this time. And that carries unanimously with thanks to all. Well, moving on. That takes us to I've got the next resolution before me, that the existing 80-kilometer, is this item 17.2? Oh, I'll come to that in a moment. What I'm going to do is, I know we've dealt with item 9 related to health. 9.1 was dealt with. We've dealt with 10. Items related to human services, we've dealt with. All items related to planning have been dealt with. That brings me down to item 15, items related to enterprise programs. Councillor Fonseca to deal with item 15.3, which I believe was held by Councillor Starr. Councillor Fonseca, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. Item 15.3, 2018 Statement of Remuneration and Expenses for Information was held by Councillor Starr. Over to you, Councillor Starr.
I need a little clarification. I just saw on the chart there that there were a couple of councillors that have retired, I guess for a term or two, and yet there were still dollars in there for, I'm not sure, was that post-retirement funding or I think I heard a rumor one time that you're allowed to defer once you leave council. I mean, I just don't know where those dollars, for clarification, where those dollars are coming from.
That's Stephen.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. As councillors retire, they do have options on how long they can have the payments deferred.
I can't hear.
The individual councillors, as they retire, are given an option of either taking a lump sum up front or deferring payment over a number of years. So that's individually discussed with each councillor as they retire.
Oh, okay. That answers it then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Sato.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I could be doing my math wrong, so forgive me if I am. And I know we were a little surprised when we saw the $49,000 for Mayor Crombie on here as expenses, but as she explained, which it doesn't explain here, that was for her newsletter. And others of us for 2018 have newsletters on there as well. I would like to have staff come back and just clarify some of those costs, because if we have 248,000 households in the city of Mississauga, that my calculation on that was about 29 to 30,000 for distribution. So I doubt that it costs an additional 20,000 to produce the newsletter, so 49,000 seems very high. I know my costs for a complete distribution in my ward, and I'm just trying to do a little bit of math right here, arithmetic. My costs for my ward are about 2,600, including apartments. That's for a full distribution. So if you multiplied that times 11, because we're all about the same, comes out to about what I had calculated for all of the apartments and units in the city, which is about 28,600 based on the bulk mailing. So how did it get up to 49,000? That seems really high.
I'm not sure who on staff could respond.
Okay. Or is this including other items?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think the best approach to that would be to come back with a more detailed report for you, just to sum up some of the questions that you've asked in a more fulsome way.
Okay, I think it's important, though, that this information be very clear, because this report is public. So when you publish a report that's saying that one member of council spent $49,000 and there's no explanation as to what that was for, I know down on the bottom, note 2, conferences, conferences and other expenditures reflect discretionary term limit items and cost of regional newsletters. And considering we have a 22,000 roughly term expense policy, the numbers just don't add up for that one. And I guess if these are only for 2018, okay, I'm just a little confused. So could we maybe get more of an explanation on conferences and other expenses and have it broken out as to what's newsletter and what is other expenses, and bring that back. And I think it needs to be brought back publicly because, you know, this could.
This is public.
It is public, but it's public without information. And that's my concern, is that this is what is presented today to the public, but there's no explanation as to what it's for, because, I mean, to me, $49,000 for a newsletter is extremely high.
Yes.
And I know the mayor had sent us an email saying it was for her newsletter, but it doesn't cost $49,000 to produce a newsletter and mail it to the citizens of Mississauga, so.
Okay, great. So I
not
think
clear.
Councillor Sato, David wants to also respond, and yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it's okay with council, we could just bring this report back as long as there's no legal reasons why it has to be presented today. Why don't we just send this report back to staff? We can bring it. Oh, there is.
Oh, someone has an answer up there, I think.
So, but we can, go ahead.
So there is a requirement under the municipal act.
Yes.
So through clerks, is that direction to bring back the detail?
Yeah, we can bring it back with a column that shows what the newsletter expenses were separate from the other expenses.
And could I suggest that in future that's what's
Yes.
happened? Thank you. And also I had asked to have the cost of the newsletter clarified, if that can come back, because to me, it wouldn't cost $49,000 to send a newsletter to all of the citizens of Mississauga. So if we could have that explicit information, that'd be appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Sato. Councillor Parrish.
I'm going to take a little shot at it. I don't think the 49,831 is all for a newsletter, because some of these other numbers have conferences in them, so that could include Mayor Crombie's conferences. So I think separating it out is a good idea. Secondly, I would suggest we refer this off to the Procedures Committee for review. Mayor Brown hasn't produced a citywide letter, and Mayor Thompson hasn't produced a citywide letter on the region, and maybe regional letters for mayors should be restricted to their city expenses rather than the regional expenses. So I'd like to move this to the next agenda of the Procedures Committee to have a review there and have a good discussion and bring back a report.
Okay, thank you very much. Just looking to clerks for clarification. So could those both be direction items? They don't require a motion, correct? Okay, thank you very much. So we do not need a recorded vote for receiving the information here today, the report today, or we do? We do not. Okay, so then that's back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And with that, we're down to item 17, items related to public works. In the absence of Councillor Groves, Vice Chair Fortini. And Councillor Fortini, I believe we have the two items that were held were 17.2 and 17.3.
Mr. Chair, yes, 17.2, this is about the implement and speed reduction on regional roads. It's Mississauga regional roads, and also Bevard and City of Brampton, Ward 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and also Town of Keldon under the bylaw 24-2019.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to staff, just specifically about the comprehensive speed limit review of Beauvert from Heritage Road to Airport Road. When was that review conducted?
We'll just bring down Joe, because his
Sure.
and his team do
No
all
problem.
the technical analysis.
It was done in the last couple months.
Perfect. And I am supportive of the reduction of speed 100%. In fact, I'd bring it down to 50 if I could. I'm only asking the question because I thought we should give you a heads up. So we are going to get a delegation regarding our specific area on Beauvert that involves a plaza on the southeast corner where they are having significant issues. There's a plaza there with one Montessori school, so a lot of families going in and out of that plaza, as well as one tutoring school and a number of different things happening in that plaza as well. They told us that it's estimated about 1,500 cars go in and out of that plaza during the day, especially during rush hour traffic when families are picking up their kids from school. And there is only one entrance and exit from that plaza, which goes on to Beauvert, just before the lights at Chinguacousy. So they've petitioned, they've met with Councillor Vicente and I, they've petitioned us, they're delegating to City Council very soon, possibly by Wednesday. But in their petition, they're also interested in talking to the region. I think a traffic study was done, not in the recent past, specifically on that site, but in the further past. And they said they didn't qualify for a traffic light. But there's other issues related to that, and would love to brief you on it as we look at this particular traffic study and see if there was any specific results in that on that intersection.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I think we've had some correspondence back and forth, and we've been reviewing that location. But for sure, we could attend that meeting and work with you to discuss it further.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I believe also 17.3 was held for annual report on the water program information. Should we also bring 17.4 ahead as part of the same report? See.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Again, to Commissioner Smith. This is just a comment from Councillor Vicente and I. We toured the wastewater treatment and water facility plant and just wanted to thank you and the staff for the amazing work that you are doing for water quality. As newbies on council, it was incredibly eye-opening. So just a huge thank you to the Lakeview and yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. We won't need a motion for this, right, Mr. Chair or the clerk?
Thank you very much, but I understand through the clerk, on item 17.2, that Councillor Fortini, Vice Chair Fortini, we need an actual vote on that?
Yeah.
So if you would
So,
call
yeah.
the vote on 17.2 at this time, recorded.
And it's recordable.
Yes.
Thank you.
And can I suggest the mover was Councillor Santos and seconded by Councillor Vicente? Is that appropriate? Very good. And whenever the clerk can call the vote.
You
17.2, you're asking for it to be voted on again, just to be clear? Oh, it was passed? So you're certifying that the vote was passed? Very good. It's been passed. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Back to me, thank you. Just some clarity with regards to 18.2, I'm down to communications. That is the Great Lakes Water Initiative. In days gone by, we sent resolutions on this. I believe we may have a resolution that I think Mayor Crombie, of course, our friend Councillor Tovey would move this on the Great Lakes, the pollution, the environment, the situations, and we're part of that association. I don't know if we have it before us or if perhaps that's something we can leave for the next meeting. Perhaps then we'll, because there's a receipt recommended of the report, but I thought we might have had a resolution. But I'll tell you what, I will leave it at that if someone just wants to move a receipt for now, and we'll double back accordingly. We have a list, though. Councillor Raz, please, I'll go to the list. Councillor Raz.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I know that I'm sure the mayor, as the representative for the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative, would be happy to move a future motion that we'll bring forward at some point.
Thank you very much. Does the commissioner have some more information on that?
Through the chair, because this has been an issue of importance to council in the past, we have prepared a similar motion we've used in the past. So we could either bring it back, or I think clerks will allow us to put it on the screen, and if there's a mover and seconder, we can do it today.
Yes, and I've just been given direction from the clerk that reads as follows, that section 5.1 5.81B of the procedural bylaw 9/2018 be amended to waive in order to permit consideration of a motion related to correspondence item 18.2. So I need a vote now to, in effect, reopen, and I require 2/3 first to deal with it. And Madam Clerk, a show of hands or a recorded vote? Recorded vote that I need 2/3 to reopen it before I put our historic resolution on the board again. So if you could vote now to reopen the issue.
This is to reopen.
And that carries unanimously, well beyond the 2/3 required. I now have the motion itself, and do you see it on the screen? Do you want to take a moment and read it? But I am told it's sort of the one that we've just refreshed from days gone by that we've dealt with before. So I will leave it just for a moment or two before I call it as being taken as read. And then I believe Councillor Dasko would be happy to move it and Councillor Rass would be happy to second it, or?
Sure, I was going to move it, but
Okay.
if Councillor Dasko wishes, that's fine too.
Very good. That is my mover and seconder. And with that, I will call the recorded vote now. And that too carries unanimously. Thank you. Bringing us down to item 19, other business. Is there any other business before the chair? Councillor Vicente?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Under 20.2.
Okay, you're gonna deal with that as a notice of motion under 20.2?
No, I believe it's a item
Yeah, I thought it was under business, but
under new business.
under new business. I'll deal with it now. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little bit hesitant to bring this up because the Mayor of Mississauga left, I'm sure, to attend other business. But perhaps we can just have a quick discussion. It's no secret that here in this council, all of the Mississauga councillors sit at this table. For the city of Mississauga, there are 6 out of the 11 that sit here. And for Caledon, I believe it's 5 out of a total of how many, Mr. Mayor?
24.
How many members of 24 out of yours? So we have endorsed here in this council a proposal for the chair of the Region of Peel to advocate on our behalf for the province to recognize the good work that happens here at the Region of Peel. The Region of Peel is one of the best, if not the best, managed regional governments here in the province. And it was just a little bit, I would say, disconcerting to see a vote from Mississauga to advocate to the province for Mississauga to be a separate municipality. In observing conversations on social media and in other venues, there's obviously a disconnect, because it was my understanding that here at this table we were all for keeping the region together and for endorsing the work that we are doing. I believe that that was the instruction given to our chair, and I'm sure our CAO can confirm that that was indeed passed earlier in this term. I have no doubt that the city of Mississauga for the past 40 years has led the charge in terms of population, in terms of tax revenue collected. But there are different ways in which you measure the contributions to a municipality. I know that the mayor of Mississauga for many years, mayor of Caledon, sorry, for many years have said that there is a little bit of Caledon under every single road in the region. And Mississauga has led the way in terms of job creation for the Region of Peel. In the city of Brampton, we have been predominantly a residential area with great places to live. Caledon has chosen to try and maintain a more rural lifestyle. But do these differences justify for one of us to split off and be in a different city, a separate city? I don't think it does. And so I just wanted to raise my concern about that.
about the news that was read in the media. And I see that there are other speakers on the board, and I welcome just a conversation on this and see where it is that we truly stand here at this table. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Just an observation. I appreciate the comment. It isn't in the form of a motion or direction before the floor. However, I would welcome the conversation and continue on. I don't know if we're leading towards a motion or a resolution. With that caveat, I will carry on. Mayor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. And it's probably premature to have a conversation at this table on regional governance. We don't know where any of us can predict where Queen's Park is going. I think the one thing that's important, though, there's been some discussions in the media on the financials. And the reality is we're all friends around this table, and when Mississauga does well, Peel Region does well. When Brampton does well, Peel Region does well. And so we all want to see our municipalities treated equitably and to succeed. And for that reason, I think when there's misinformation in the media, it's a disservice to everyone around this table. And so what I'd like to see, and I can, if someone can help me with the wordsmithing, I would like all the data that the Region of Peel has on the financials provided to members of regional council. That's why it's not a he said, she said in terms of financial information. And I know that there was a report done by the region by Deloitte, published on March 15th, in terms of looking at the financial impact of the analysis of service delivery models. And if I could move that is provided to the public, and I know that Councillor Medeiros wants to second that, transparency as we have difficult discussions is important. And if that report could be released to council and to the public, not to be left in camera, and any additional assessment the region has done on financial contributions by municipalities, if that information can be shared as well, given the fact we're having this conversation, this consultation with the province right now, I think transparency is only appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Yes, this is what I was afraid of when it all started. And in fact, I suggested to Mayor Crombie that she doesn't get into a back and forth on money and tweets and carrying on. From my own point of view, and I'm not speaking for anyone else, this is probably the only opportunity we will ever have to be a single-tier city, and that's why we moved that motion, and that's why I supported it. It's got nothing to do with dissing the region. It's got nothing to do with saying Brampton's not carrying its share, or the country bumpkins from Caledon aren't carrying their share. The region has worked well for as many years as it's worked, but I think given there's a review going on, it's our only chance to be an independent city. And that's something that I think a lot of us have wanted for a long time. It doesn't mean we don't like playing in this playpen. We are very happy here. I'm very happy here. And I don't think getting into these kinds of battles is good for anybody. So that is not why I voted with our group. The other question I want answered, and I'd like to see the motion that instructed the chair of the region to advocate on behalf of staying in the region of Peel as though we all agreed to it, because I don't ever remember having that vote taken. And I think there too, I would caution the chair to be a little bit circumspect and not come out all guns blasting that the region is all there wanting to stay there, because that inspires the kinds of conversations that we're just complaining about. I think we need to all take a deep breath. I don't think anybody's going to have any input into what's going on with this review. It's going to come out as it comes out. We're all entitled to state opinions, and ours is, for speaking for myself, an emotional thing. We just want to be our own city. It's not a big request. London gets it, Hamilton gets it. It's got nothing to do with getting rid of our partners. So I just wish we'd cool all the rhetoric, including Mayor Brown's recent request to start bringing out all the numbers. It's just going to cause more strife. If you want to bring them out, go ahead, but back and forth on this is not healthy for anybody. And if in the end we're all together again, there's gonna be a lot of wounds to heal if it gets any worse. So this is I'm a fighter. But I don't think we should be fighting right now. I think we should just take this easy, take deep breaths, and stop fighting with each other. And I would like to see that motion, Chair Yanika, because I think you've gone a little overboard on that one. I think you've made the case a little more strongly than the rest of us would have liked you to.
And point taken, Councillor Parrish, you're right in terms of what is the position of this council. I think the CAO should speak to that. I think that's well put. Through to the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has not been a resolution of this council on regional governance in any way, shape, or form. So neither the chair nor myself have been asked to go and advocate one way or the other. There has been no official resolution.
And Councillor Parrish, the second point, your point's well put. And in the analogy I gave to staff yesterday, for better or for worse, and I apologize for my analogies, but as I put it to a group of staff I was dealing with yesterday, for better or worse, you've made me the Pope of this place, so I have to promote Christianity. That's how I put it. If I don't believe in the region of Peel, who does? Knowing that we don't have an official position from around the table. So through to Councillor Vicente, we've never had a vote on the official position around the table. But when called upon on everyone's behalf to speak to the minister and say, what are the attributes in his subcommittee of the region of Peel? I think I'm duty bound to speak to the attributes of the region of Peel.
Would you then be duty bound to run some of those by us before you make them a public position?
That's a good question. I grapple with myself, and that I've discussed with the clerk and the solicitor for the reason that I've given you. Either you hold the office and you have an obligation to this organization, or you don't. And it's a very fair question, Carolyn, I understand. And I'm going to speak or ask the solicitor to speak because I put the very same question to
Well,
you.
just before we hear from the solicitor, comparing yourself to the Pope is probably not the best comparison you've ever done. Because the Pope is infallible and you are not.
Oh, no question.
No question. And I would suggest, as gently as possible, because I'm trying to stay very calm and neutral and pleasant, that sometimes it's a good idea to check with the rest of us before you make pontifications. And we could all be either joined in or modify it slightly, but I would like to hear from Patrick.
Thank you, Carolyn. Through to Patrick.
Just from the legal perspective, and without attempting to weigh in on any political considerations, the Municipal Act does afford to the chair as head of council the responsibility to promote the municipality locally, nationally, and internationally. And I would suggest that it's implicit in that mandate that the continuing existence of the municipality is presupposed.
Oh, I might actually not agree with you, Patrick. It's probably twice in the years we've known each other. To promote the region of Peel outside economically or anything else, but to promote its existence, I think requires to check with all of us. And I think all of us would probably say, what will be, and let's try to put forward a position that's not going to poke a ballpoint pen in someone's eye. I think we need to try to keep everything on the low down, because I don't think it's going to make any difference. Whatever we all say, whatever we all tweet, whatever we all huff and puff, they're going to blow the house down or they're not. And I think it's the best thing that we could do is all stay friendly and not take harsh positions that we're going to live to regret.
Thank you. I'll carry on with my list. Councillor Sato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was basically going to say the same thing. There has been no vote taken here at the region for a position on the governance issue, Councillor Vicente. So the chair was not carrying forward the position of the region of Peel. I'm sort of tending to disagree with you also, Patrick, because you might recall that some years ago, and Nando, you probably even recall it, some years ago when we were dealing with the representation issue at the region, and there was presentations to Justice Adams, and a former chair of the region and a former CAO of the region, not David, it was prior to him, presented to Justice Adams a very long written presentation that took a position on representation at the region of Peel that had never been shared with members of council. And in fact, it was very damaging to the city of Mississauga. And we were made aware of it when the conversation was happening with Justice Adams through the mayors and the city managers going down there. Well, you know, when they hear that, well, you know, the Region of Peel's position is this, and the Region of Peel had never given a position. And it was made very, very clear then by council, and I believe there was probably even a resolution passed at the time, that the chair of the region would only advocate in this type of situation to other levels of government on positions that had been approved and endorsed by regional council. And I see no concern with Chair Unica giving his personal opinion as to the issues around the Region of Peel. And I mean, I'm personally very proud of the work that the Region of Peel has done over the years, and I'm very proud of all of the staff at the Region of Peel. I think the people who are suffering the most through this entire process are the staff at the region and in the municipalities. And anytime you have governance situations like this, we deal with it from a governance perspective. And we know that no matter what happens, unless it's status quo, which I doubt it's going to be status quo, but you never know, there will be impacts to staff. We don't know which staff and we don't know where. So we have to treat this whole issue very sensitively. But Mississauga is not doing anything, is not saying anything that we have not said before, and that when you were a councillor in Mississauga, Chair Unica, you were standing up and saying. So I understand we've appointed you as the chair of the Region of Peel. You have to stand up for the staff and the Region of Peel. But I think you have to be extremely careful that when you make those statements, whether it's to the media or officially on a consultation process, that you make it very clear that that is your opinion and that it is or your position, and that it is not the position of regional council. So I think that's probably where some of that concern came in. Councillor Vicente, you obviously thought that it was the position of council, and therefore that we were being contrary. But in lieu of the position of council, we are, in Mississauga, we are stating what we have been stating for, well, I think Hazel started saying it in 1974. So, you know, it's nothing new in the city of Mississauga. And we have brought it to the region several times as well. And you know, it's one of those things that that the province is going to do what the province feels like doing on any given day. And maybe it depends how much sleep the Premier had the night before, or, you know, what mood he's in. And I really don't think that much of what we're saying, what we're doing, is going to change the Premier's mind. I'm fully convinced he's already made up his mind what he's going to do. I do respect the people that are doing the study, but it is flawed. The consultation process is extremely flawed. Our staff went through, I think there's 17 questions on the consultation online, and they ran out of information and patience at number 10, I believe they said yesterday. And for the average citizen to try and get through those and give an informed position, I haven't gone through them, but apparently they're absolutely impossible. So, you know, I think public input is not necessarily going to be informed input, and I think that the two people that are doing this, they understand what they're doing and what the input is. But Mr. Chair, I just think you need to make sure that it's your personal opinion.
And Councillor Sato, thank you very much for those wide words. And I do want to re-speak on a matter. I apologize the way I phrased that analogy. I should have said, it is as though someone is the Pope and you would expect them to promote Christianity. But I apologize for how that came out because that wasn't appropriate. But you understand fully the sentiment I was trying to express with my apologies to the pontiff and right on down. Thank you. Councillor Dasco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just like to put out a cautionary tale that cooler heads kind of prevail at this point. I don't believe that it's helpful for anybody right now to go off in any kind of bent that is kind of half-cocked. The motion that was passed with us at City Council was in principle. And I think that has been lost in the media. I've had so many people that have approached me and said, oh, Mississauga's made the decision that they want to separate. Well, no, this is in principle in terms of what the desire is. And this is, again, you know, you would have to be underground not to know that this has been what Mississauga has talked about for, since it was 1974. And I think that was an important part of the motion that was put forward, and Councillor Sato had made sure to put that out there, and we all agreed with it unanimously. And also, we do have a time, which is April 8th, evening of in council, which will also be covered through multi ways of getting information, Facebook, Twitter, etc., that we do have public consultation, because it's the most important thing I think that we can do as a city and as a region is provide consultation that's taken in by the public. This government seems to be big on for the people, and so I do believe that the people should be the ones giving their input and speaking. And I also would like to say, whichever way this all pans out, and I think we all could be getting very worked up about nothing, which is also one of the options that is out there, that either way it is, every single employee at the region of Peel needs to be commended for their good work, and you know, it's this is something that was put on us by the province, and for good or for bad, but I just want to commend everybody at the region for doing just a great job.
Thank you. Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you, through the chair. It's an interesting conversation, and I understand my colleagues from Mississauga and the caution that you're providing. If we look at the contextual, and not to raise a big debate, we understand this was under review. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of comments in the media by your mayor of council, which throw around figures that we're expected to react to. Certainly when you put media contact our mayor to understand where these figures are coming from. I, as a regional councillor here, don't have a handle on what the numbers are. So I will second the motion. I am supporting Mayor Brown, and this is really about having open data. And we talked about the residents, and we talked about us understanding what type of conversation that we're having, because the numbers are unclear. Another thing I would raise is the opportunity cost. When we talk about not just the fact, whatever investments we put in whatever community, it's the time that you put it, there was an opportunity that was there. So the value of that investment, so it's not comparing dollars to dollars. I think there's a more fruitful analysis. But I do find it also difficult to understand where our chair is here to uphold the region, is asked to speak on behalf of the region. We are sworn an oath to the region, and then have to expect him not to talk about the virtues of how our regional governance works well, or how the regional government works well, notwithstanding Mississauga has every right to advocate on what they want to advocate on and whatever their position is, but to a certain degree tell our chair, well, really, your position there is just to talk about staff, and we have good staff, but really don't comment on how well it functions or how well it operates. I think that would be doing a disservice in his position. So I commend you, I support you. It's a difficult position. I do understand being a councillor formerly from Mississauga, but ultimately all we ask is that you provide the information of how well this organization is run, to its virtues, and so be it, whatever the province. But to sort of advise that you're taking a personal position, you're not. You're the chair. You're taking a position which is institutionally and symbolically you represent. So I thank you for your work, and I will support the motion. And again, understanding the cautions from my colleagues from Mississauga, however, it seems that the first warning was thrown, and we're just in a situation now that we need to get a handle on our numbers, because our residents now question us on what numbers we're dealing with, how can we prove that. So we just want to have a more fulsome conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Brown.
I know this is becoming a very wide discussion. What I was hoping to just put forward, and of course it would take council's blessing to do so. I read that report, that Deloitte report from March 15th, looking at the numbers, and I think it's very informative for council. And if we're all dealing with the same facts, we're all reasonable people, and we can have reasonable discussions. Right now, that is confidential, and so when the media talk to us, or if residents talk to us, we can't talk to them about it. We're eligible to look at that because we're members of this regional council. And so what I suggest is we don't wade into a debate on what the chair's role is, because we could be here for 5 hours talking about that. We don't talk about Mississauga's motion. The province has asked us to do some consultation to look at this very difficult topic. And I think as we do that consultation, if it's based on facts and accurate numbers, not two different perspectives on the numbers. So if that Deloitte report from March 15th, if the region could just make it public, that's all I was asking today. For the context of this conversation, I can't imagine anyone here would be against having information that's already been commissioned made public as it relates to this conversation directly.
Thank you. Councillor Innes.
Thank you, Chair. So I won't comment on the role of the chair, because I think that we've gone around the table on that. In 2004, when Justice Adams gave his report, I've had a couple children since then, and it's been a while, but there was financials that were done at that time. And I think that it would be interesting, I agree, and I'm going to support the motion because the numbers don't lie, and I think that we all need to have that, and we all need to be able to speak to it. I know that all of us around the table have probably been approached to speak to media and to residents about it, and we can't disclose those particulars, so I think that we need to be able to have that. And I think further, that information should be provided to the province, because they need to make a good decision, and they can't do that unless they actually have the numbers. But I also think that it would be beneficial to for our staff at the region to do a comparison of the 2003-2004 financials and what was found in Justice Adams' report to where we are today, because it will show a pattern, I suspect. And I think that that is important information, not only for all of us, but also for the province as well. So I'm not sure if that could be based as direction to do that work, or if you require a motion for that. But I think that that would be beneficial for all of us as well.
Thank you. I will take my last speaker, then I think between myself and the CAO, we will speak to all of the above. My final speaker, Mayor Thompson.
Yeah, and I think where Councillor Innes is going, the Justice Adams report shows everything from social services to everything, how, who, and where everything goes. And it really tells the whole story. You can't just pull cherry pick one number and run with it. I think you need a holistic point. It's fair to the public to do that. And also, I will go back, I know others aren't touching it, but Mr. Chairman, as a mayor, there's an expectation that you need to deliver when you're asked questions, and you do your job, and you're doing a good job, and keep it up.
Thank you. So the motion before the floor, I'm going to ask the CAO to speak to it. In fact, maybe I'll go to you right away, because we've had work done for Deloitte for us in the past. Then, as part of my invitation to speak to the two individuals that the Premier's asked to be consulted on behalf of the Region of Peel, the staff did some more work. They presented it to me. It was never my intention to make it public unless I have direction from this body. But of course, individuals have asked me after comments in the press, so now I'm in the awkward situation of having to lie and say there isn't data necessarily. So I said, unless council as a whole tells me what must be done, it's a very delicate situation. But a more fuller explanation as to its genesis, I think the CAO can provide. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, when in the early days of when Nando became chair, Inika became chair, we talked about the upcoming review by the province, and to prepare him for his meeting with the advisors, we asked our external auditors, Deloitte, to do an analysis of the 3 obvious options that we anticipated he may be asked about by the advisors. The one option was a City of Peel. The second option was status quo and opportunities for efficiencies. And the third option was dissolution, breaking up of the region into 3 separate municipalities. And we asked Deloitte simply to look at the financial implications based on the information that they could gather now. And the reason we went to Deloitte was because we wanted an independent analysis by a reputable company, and Deloitte's our external auditor, so that's why we used them. They did provide us and the chair with quite a large report showing an analysis of those 3 options based on financial information that they know today. And that report really formed the basis of a discussion with the advisors. That report does not talk about governance in the political sense, because that's not their expertise, and we didn't want their opinion on that anyway. It spoke about financial implications. So, and that was the information that was provided to the chair to support any discussion. And it was, in summary, provided to the advisors when we met. And the advisors also discussed other issues related to governance, as I'm sure they did with the 3 mayors as well. But that is the genesis and the substance of the report by Deloitte.
And before I go to Councillor Parrish, and so that actual presentation was done by David in the room when I was with the 2 consultants in terms of this is the analysis that we brought forward. Going fast forward, I left it at that. But then in days gone by, the good Mayor of Brampton gave me a call, says, I'm reading some information in the press, Nando. What would be the rebuttal? What data, what documents, what information do you have? Well, I can't lie to the mayor and say, as it just so happens, there's been some more analysis that's been done, but I can't be sharing the nitty-gritty of it until this council tells me to. And that's why I've said, if you wish to come forward and ask council to make it public, I am more than happy, and because the last time I shared information without all of you, that was a point of some concern. So I was either in the position of having to lie to a mayor that asked me a direct question, and I said, you know what, let's bring it to council if you wish to make your motion. I am more than happy to share it if that is your direction. Councillor Parrish.
And there you go again, Nando, sharing information with 1 member of council and not the rest.
Well, I don't
No,
believe that.
I don't want you to rebut me. I would like to move a motion that says that report that you shared with Patrick and that you shared with the 2 investigators come to us in camera at our next meeting. And I would support Patrick's motion, which says is that the March 15th report, or is that a different one? Which one are you asking to make public immediately, Patrick?
All information regarding to the numbers that are currently being discussed in the media. I don't see why we need to keep it a secret.
No, I don't either, but I think it shouldn't have been a secret. I think as soon as you pulled that together and you paid Deloitte to do this update on the 3 options, it should have been shared with us immediately. So we're not flying blind. We're not holding meetings in Mississauga to say, should we separate in principle or should we not? Because we don't have the numbers. We've never had the numbers. And my understanding is if the region paid for that, then it should be shared with all of us as soon as it's done. I have to keep making this point, Nando. You are not the Pope.
My response is I'd be delighted to share it with you if that is the direction. And I'm grateful that you've asked for it. So if that is the direction.
But we didn't know it existed, so we didn't know to ask for it, Nando.
very correct.
You've only been in the chair a short time, and we're already having problems with
Well,
secrets.
I think some may be, some may not. I'll have to accept that either way.
I guess it depends on what side they're on in the
Yeah.
argument.
But having said that, I have a motion before the floor. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion? Mayor Brown.
Well, they can give direction to staff.
Through to the clerk, just to be clear on the motion before the floor.
They can give direction.
Put your microphone on, please.
Sorry.
They can pass a motion to give direction to staff to come back with the information, but you can't pass a motion and vote on it today.
Yeah. Can-
Okay,
Yeah,
direction to
I would
staff.
hope that under the direction of council, we have to reopen vote, do whatever the wish is, we can do it today. I'm sure there must be some mechanism. So it's more the wish of council. If council wants it sent out now, I've got to believe we can find the procedure by which to send it out now. Mayor Brown.
Chair, I understand if there's 2/3, we can simply make it public. And in fairness to the chair, if the mayor calls with questions, and I was asking regional staff, and then I asked the chair as well, I just wanted to know what information the previous council had that I wasn't here before, that I could learn from as we're having statements made in the media. And the fact that there is an update that was done, I benefited from being able to see that, but I think everyone should benefit from having a full understanding of the numbers. But the only thing I'd say to Councillor Parrish is, of course, I believe everyone should have the information, but I suggest I don't think we need to wait a week. Now. And so but I'd say not in camp. The problem is we can all access it today as is. You're a member of council. You're able to see any in-camera paper as is. What I thought I heard was you say that it'd be shared in camera again next week. And what I was going to suggest is this doesn't need to be in camera. This entire document should be made public.
I agree.
Okay, good.
Patrick just said two-thirds vote to reopen
Yes,
it.
2/3.
So, Patrick, the solicitor has confirmed 2/3 votes to reopen and then carry on with direction just as it's been given. So, there are no other speakers. The first motion is to reopen the question. Show of hands, or Madam Clerk, a recorded vote? Recorded vote. 2/3 to reopen. That we can vote on the matter itself right now. Right. Just following procedure. In fairness, waiving the rules is the better phrase. Yes, Councillor Sato, that's correct. To waive the rules to allow us to deal with it today. And we need 2/3 to waive the rules so that we can deal with it today. Thank you. And that carries. And that carries, Madam Clerk, that carries. And now the motion before the floor. And I just want to be clear that I've understood it. It's that whatever data or package the staff has put together for me on all its fronts be made available publicly today to all members of council and as a public document for all. Very good. That's the motion before the floor.
The entire document.
The whole package. I was given notes from years gone by. You know what I mean, the whole package. I want to be clear. Okay, so the package that was presented in advance of my presentation. The solicitor wishes to speak.
If I may, just a cautionary notion that there was reference to the Adams mediation process and material related to that process. I think we would want to check on any undertakings of confidentiality among the parties who were involved in that. It was essentially a mediated process. It may be not a problem, but I don't personally know whether there were any such undertakings.
Very good. To the CAO.
The material that was provided through Deloitte to the chair did not have any information from the Adams. It was the following information: the in-depth analysis of the three options I mentioned, including a jurisdictional review of what has happened in other jurisdictions, such as Haldeman, Norfolk, Montreal, and other places, when there has been a change in governance. How assets are divided up, the process that's undertaken there. It gave an updated evaluation of Mississauga's day-and-day report, and it also provided, we also provided a copy of the Deloitte report on the regional roads review that came to this council, and also a report from Mississauga from the date escapes me, some years ago when garbage collection, the responsibility for solid waste was uploaded from the municipalities to the region because of the financial implications of doing that. That's the package in its entirety that will be provided.
Councillor Parrish.
Yes, that was what I was going to suggest was, I agree with Patrick there, let's not go back too far. We've all seen a lot of that. Let's just have that updated package and have it as soon as we can have it.
Thank you. Everybody is clear on the motion with the oversight of the solicitor that he's satisfied we're not doing anything untoward. I think that's pretty straightforward. That has been moved by, I need a mover and a seconder, Mayor Brown and Councillor Vicente brought up, sorry, Councillor Medeiros was the one that seconded, a recorded vote. And that carries unanimously, and I was glad to support it myself as well. Thank you. Moving on, is there any other business before the chair? Notices of motion. We have a motion. Sorry? Oh yeah, and that's the one that I've got here. Yes, item 21.1, the motion from Councillor Dasko regarding the renaming of the Lakeview Water Treatment Plant. Councillor Dasko.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am honored and thrilled to say that a kind gentleman who first kind of cut his teeth, if you will, at the Toronto Township as an engineer, has seen a lot of projects through for us as a region, as cities and municipalities. A gentleman by the name of Arthur Kennedy, as a lot of people call him Art Kennedy. I had the privilege and honor of being at his 100th birthday party, not this Sunday beforehand, and it was also attended by a few others. His kid brother was also there. His kid brother is 96 years old, and we had an interesting conversation. This actually came up through his daughter, what I'd like to bring forward now. But he had said, you know, in his day, he always thought it was kind of the noble thing to do was just name particular buildings off areas in which they stood. And so we had the Lakeview plant, just named the Lakeview plant. But I think he is a bit of a living legend. The family has deep roots throughout not just the municipality but in the region, but also the province. And I would be happy to bring up a motion towards the renaming of that plant in his name. Before I read it, is there anybody else that may wish to speak to this?
Yes,
as well?
and then I will come back to you so that you may read it accordingly. My list is Mayor Thompson and Councillor Starr. Mayor Thompson.
Yes, I've had the fortunate to meet Mr. Kennedy on a few occasions. As Chair of Public Works, I sat down with him. He made an offer, and Chair Kolb was with me at the time. But I got to tell you, the reason why we've had, at that point in time when he was telling us the story, was the opening of the water plant, celebration was there, is we had the cheapest water rates in North America and the cheapest wastewater in Canada. I still think we're close to that today. Be interesting what those stats are. It was that man's long-term vision is the reason why our appeal system works so good and is so efficiently run. Many built separate little plants. He built it large and gave it. And when you listen to the reasoning of why they did the two wastewater plants through the watersheds, one water plant, the vision that this man has is amazing. And it's amazing that he's still well at 100 years of age. I don't know if he's still driving, but he was driving that night. But
up about a year ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, the knowledge, and I really think it'd be important that if he's still got his faculties, it'd be really important that PAMA would sit down and do a live interview because to glean the information of what he has, and he can put it in such layman terms. He could articulate it and put it in layman's terms. He's so good at that. I think it'd be really good just to have that conversation so it's not lost.
Well said. Councillor Starr.
I've had the honor of knowing Art for probably 40-odd years. I met him when I was first living in Ward 7 and then became a counselor, and then he made sure I had a little tour, and that was 1979, 1980. And he was always so proud to be an engineer, and he was so proud of the family background in the end, but he never spoke about it. And just so everybody knows, his uncle was premier for a short period of time, Thomas Kennedy. His brother was a MPP. His other brother was a long-serving member for Mississauga Council.
At your job.
And you're there now. And lived forever, by the way, on Canterbury Drive or whatever. And that's where I used to go because I knew a little bit about cars. He says, my old Mercedes is not running. I mean, why he ever had that old Mercedes? But, you know, he had to have it running. You have to tell the story that because he said, you got to come over there because I got to take Mabel to the hairdresser. Now, Mabel was a resident. So that was the old style, politics from way back. But Art was just a gem of a man. He was, I talked to him at length at the Remembrance Day service, I guess, last year before, and he still gets out. And of course, you'd know him too, Chair. And I would say that, let's support this 100%. He deserves it, and I know he'll be very calm about it, but he'll probably say, you shouldn't have done it, Counselor, but, do it. It's one of those things that I think we should appreciate those people who have been around 100 years. And by the way, I couldn't attend that party because the same day my mother turned 100. So anyway, there you go.
Ron, thank you. And before I give it back, Councillor Kovac, on that, go ahead, please.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Dasko. My apologies. Were you intending to keep Lakeview in the naming? Just for clarity, I thought maybe would it make more sense for it to be the Arthur P. Kennedy Lakeview Water Treatment Plant, being that for you have Clarkson Wastewater Treatment Plant, you have Lorne Park Water Treatment Plant, you've got Lakeview Water Treatment Plant. Would it make sense to maybe keep that in?
I would welcome that. I don't think that takes away from the intent of the naming of the building itself and the facility. Art is very proud of the building and the name that he put on the building. I actually brought up the idea, sorry? Stay with the art. Okay. Stay with art. I'm told, let's stick with the original intent. So that's fair enough.
Okay, and I would only say before throwing over, Ron, Councillor Starr, I took the same Ward 7 councillors tour 31 years ago when I went out to his property on Camilla Road, and in keeping with the finest traditions of the Kennedy family, service before self, soft-spoken, never been a family more, and I could learn from them, that with whispers got things done. Only spoke when there was something that needed to be said, and that's why they were listened to. And Art was the kind, and is the kindest, sweetest soul you'd ever want to meet. When he called, you visited the house because he had something important to tell you, and that was only every 5 or 6 years. But if Art had something to say, you knew wisdom was and is coming. I say was because I'm no longer his counselor. So well done on you, and richly deserved on behalf of Art and the entire Kennedy legacy in Mississauga. They'd be the equivalent of our Kennedys, so to speak. Thank you. Over to you.
Well, thank you. Is I'm okay to do that now? Please. All right. Whereas Mr. Arthur Art Kennedy, a professional engineer, was the manager of the Toronto Township Public Utilities Commission, established in 1955, which managed the waterworks for Toronto Township. And whereas Mr. Kennedy was the manager of the Public Utilities Commission of the town of Mississauga from 1968 to 1974, when the Region of Peel was formed. And whereas from 1974 until his retirement, Mr. Kennedy was the director of the Water and Wastewater Division at the Region of Peel. And whereas from 1973 until 1976, Mr. Kennedy was a director of the Ontario Waterworks Association, and whereas Mr. Kennedy received the George Warren Fuller Award in 1974 from the Ontario Waterworks Association for distinguished service in the water industry. And whereas Mr. Kennedy turned 100 years of age on March 7th, 2019, therefore be it resolved that the Region of Peel's Lakeview Water Treatment Plant be renamed to the Arthur P. Kennedy Water Treatment Plant.
Very good, and that motion has been moved by Councillor Dasko. Councillor Starr, if you do us the honor of seconding that. You have it before you. Recorded vote, please. And that is carried unanimously. There is no other notice of motion before the chair. I'm down to the bylaws. That the bylaws listed on the March 28, 2019 Regional Council agenda, being bylaws 23, 2019 and 24, 2019, to be given the required number of readings taken as read, signed by the regional chair and the regional clerk, and the corporate seal be affixed thereto. That's been moved by Councillors Kovac and Councillor McFadden. All those in favor? That is carried. The in-camera has been dealt with. No need for anything coming out of in-camera through to the staff. I don't believe so. I will read the following in terms of tidying that off, that the bylaw 25-2019 to confirm the proceedings of Regional Council at its meeting held on March 28, 2019, and to authorize the execution of documents in accordance with the Region of Peel bylaw relating thereto, be given the required number of readings taken as read, signed by the regional chair and the regional clerk, and the corporate seal be affixed thereto. That has been moved by Councillor Vicente, seconded by Councillor Carlson. All those in favor? Thank you. That is carried. A motion to confirm the proceedings of council and that we be adjourned. Moved by Councillor Fortini, seconded by Councillor Fonseca. All those in favor? Carried. Motion to adjourn and done. Thank you all.